And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, it's the eye of the tiger and the thrill of the fight, rising up to the challenge of our rivals.
Mm-hmm.
And that very much reminds me of the environment that we're in, because we are in a really exceptional, highly manipulated environment when it comes to issues that are just coming in and are really going to bring to bear a number of results in the coming year. But we here, coming into that fall 2025, are looking at some of the major moves going on in the background. We're going to get into those moves tonight, especially by our friends on the CIA UFO disclosure side. It's absolutely important to understand the moves that are going on there and the long-lasting effects therein. Tonight, we're going to do a very, very special episode for you. This is Dark Journalist episode X-203, Space Cage, and Cage is underlined there. UFO file Lockheed Takeover Nebra mystery. And, you know, the reason it's a cage is because the space cage has this aspect to it. Of course, Lockheed has talked in the past about the space fence, which had all of these incredible surveillance pieces attached to it. And the name itself gave you some idea of what they were planning to do in terms of surveillance of people on the surface. And they got to try out a lot of that technology actually during the COVID op. And it continues on and continues on. One of the most disturbing elements was a video that I discovered, which had been discarded apparently by Lockheed in the background. It was something they were working on. And one of their employees apparently put it up on a video site, and it had that kind of inside thing of about 75 different people having viewed it. And it was just like a little intra-agency thing. And they apparently used an even souped up version of it. But this was the whole thing about the space takeover. And I did actually put that up on our X. And I featured it in my appearance on the Alex Jones show yesterday. And that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic reaction to that video. And with all the great graphics that they have on the Alex show, it was an absolute blast. It was great to be on hosting while Alex was Alex had all kinds of wild things going on, including the health of his dad, and he really was making the show happen. And I got to guest host a segment there for an hour going over all of the major things that we see happening here around the Golden Dome issue and the whole Three-Eye Atlas issue and this kind of space piece encroaching and encroaching and encroaching, and we wonder how much further can they go with it. Well, it's a whole lot further, as it turns out, and we're going to get into that tonight in this very special episode focusing on Lockheed Martin and their plans for the space takeover, and also President Trump's plans to take over Lockheed. Try that one on. That's a little bit different than the things that we've been hearing around the podcast space, which has really been recycling a lot of things that we were telling you 5 or 10 years ago. And that space is very interesting to me because I was starting to have some hope that people were throwing out the CIA UFO disclosure thing because, even on their own side, Mellon had thrown Elizondo to the wolves, and they were just tucking him away and trying to come up with these new guys like Matthew Brown or whatever. And we know that these UFO hearings are scheduled under the Luna Task Force for September 9th, and they have not shown any indications that they've learned anything, except for the fact that there was some hint that Luna didn't want to be taken for a ride by these whistleblowers. And yet, from what I'm hearing, the people that are participating are some of the old hacks who got us into this problem in the first place. And that brings me to Gary Nolan. Now, Gary Nolan is a very interesting figure in the background, of course, a Stanford professor and, all of these different projects that he's worked on in biology. And as a bioscientist, it's very interesting to me that he is good friends with Anthony Fauci. and that he is regularly employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. Well, this guy, that whole podcast circuit rolled him out as the arbiter of, transparency and disclosure around the UFO file, which was really a shock. And I was like, we're right back where we started. We really are, because everyone, of course, that whole machine was touting all of these points and putting out this guy. Now, look, I've put it together that you have a choice before you what kind of disclosure that you're going to get. You're either going to get CIA Fauci disclosure or the real thing. And if you get Fauci disclosure, CIA Fauci Mellon disclosure, it's not going to be worth anything. As a matter of fact, it's going to make the situation very, very difficult to get any real answer. And I wonder about the amount of force that is behind this. First of all, this is Nolan, even popular mechanics, they understand how CIA this guy is. I don't know what is the problem with that space that they're like, well, he's not CIA. Yes, he is. It's in his own bio. I've laid out his bio on multiple occasions. So popular mechanics, this Stanford professor with CIA ties says aliens are 100% already here. Okay. That's what he says. But it's very interesting because when we get around Nolan and this whole piece, what we have to remember is that Nolan, who's sitting there talking about all of these high points of how he's, bringing disclosure and laying out the program, and everybody, on the podcast hosts who don't know anything, apparently, uninformed completely and are willing to take all of this misinformation in, they're sitting there listening like, how do we get that disclosure, Mr. CIA Fauci best friend? And, here's Nolan on his own Twitter account. Thank you, Dr. Fauci, for your tremendously positive contributions to immunology and virology, to his friend, Dr. Fauci. And we have him retweeting Jim Allison, this other PhD. Dr. Fauci is a real hero who dedicated his life to science and helping people. He led the charge against HIV and COVID. Well, that's highly debatable, shall we say. Maybe you should read the book, The Real Anthony Fauci by Bobby Kennedy. We are grateful for his 50 years of service. Enjoy your retirement, Tony. Well, that's the Gary Nolan there. So now you're getting Gary Nolan disclosure. Very, very interesting. Last week, the week before that, 3i Atlas, Talpiot disclosure. And that's Avi Lobe with his little astrophysics lab over here at Harvard. And he's giving you there's a UFO threat coming in. Get ready. It's going to pass Mars October 1st. Well. So you got him, and now they're promoting our friend Nolan. So you've got CIA, Israeli intelligence, Talpiot, telling you about a UFO threat. Those are the authorities that these hosts are going to. That's what they're looking for. And it's a problem because by the time you get to these hearings on September 9th, which are supposed to open up all these doors around the UFO file, this is what the lead-in is. Not a good sign. As a matter of fact, I've heard that Nolan is one of the participants. I don't know it, but we'll find out, I guess, by September 9th. That whole thing has been mismanaged dramatically and manipulated drastically by the intelligence community. And that includes the NRO, the NGA, and others. We're going to get into why the big push is on all that all of a sudden, and also how they are recovering and recuperating from the original disaster of running Lou Elizondo and his imminent book out there and pretending he was a whistleblower and all the rest. So the way that I look at this is very interesting. We are in a situation where it can go two ways. We're at a fork in the road. Either the intelligence community is going to take over here because they have the money, they have the podcasters in their pocket, they've got the mainstream media, or this lone outpost right here is going to upset their plans. And so tonight we're going to show you how we can upset their plans. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 203. We're going to go deep, deep tonight into the space cage UFO file, Lockheed Takeover. And the Nebra mystery is in there. That piece is interesting because I will say this, that so many of the motivations around the elite groups have to do with what they've tracked through the mystery schools about upcoming geophysical events. And let's face it, that means a pole shift, in case we didn't realize it. We're also going to be taking your questions. I want to remind you that you can ask your questions now. Miss Olivia is going to be putting those together. And in the second half of tonight's program, and we'll go to about just a couple hours with you here tonight on this Labor Day weekend. I hope everyone's having a great time in the ideas room already. We'll take your questions and put them together, and you can ask them anytime during the show. Now, Miss Olivia, before I go any further, what do you got?
Ramblin' Lamb said, just watched DJ's segment on AJ's Thursday show. He really rocked the set. Tonight's show should be fascinating. And James Pesta said, been watching for 3 years now and always impressed with the topics. No one comes to the depth and potency of all the years I've been looking for the truth.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate it. Well, it's what's fantastic about the show that we do is I learned so much from the ideas room. And so you guys, it's this symbiosis and the chemistry that we have when we go at this subject together. And, there's all kinds of versions of how people can come into these things. And with this show, you're coming in on the deep end. You're coming in on the deep side. It's going to be potent. It's going to be deep. There's just no two ways about it. So if that's what you're looking for, you've found the right place in this work. And the reason is that there aren't restraints around the things that we have as realizations and breakthroughs and facts. But we also don't go off on tangents just for, headlines or whatever. You're going to get facts because I'm very fact-based in my approach. But what I find interesting is that the facts are way more out there than all the things that people imagine. This is the nature of part of the problem. Look, you don't need, remember when Gaia was making up all those shows about blue aliens and all that stuff. You don't need any of that. I mean, the grays are certainly weird enough, and I also think that maybe we're at a point where we could really learn a great deal about the phenomena. We could learn a great deal about our own government and the structures of secrecy that are involved there. And that includes the deep state and ex-protected groups that manage that secrecy. Or we can be put in kind of an entertainment loop where it seems like you're getting something, but you're not. And that's the loop that they love to do. They've played that loop ever since they launched the TTSA and before. So they're very good at that. They'll put tons of money behind that, and that's how they control the narrative. That's a satisfactory thing because that really keeps the public out when you think about it. But I'm going to show you tonight through some historical examples how we can navigate all of this without the government disclosure aspect and without, the kind of establishment science aspect. Eventually, there's going to be a crisscross there. The important thing is that the public wakes up. And I do feel that it's getting a little late on the side of waking up around these topics, because I think they're going to land on us like a ton of bricks in the coming year or two. So I don't feel like there's another 5 years to fritter away with some phony, CIA disclosure, NGA people, NSA people coming out and giving us documentaries and books that just don't say it all. Now, the problem is that Hollywood is now behind these people. So you have Spielberg making, his movie about UFOs that's coming out next May, and it's all about these guys, the CIA whistleblower set. That's the road that they're going in. And what's the guy that made that incredible Tom Cruise Maverick movie? That team that did it, the producer director team. Well, they did a great job bringing the Maverick thing back to life. Top Gun. Tom Cruise comes back as an older guy, and that whole team that did that. Now they are doing a UFO movie, and you think, oh, this is great. And all the people that have clamored in there are all the same CIA whistleblowers that have been taking the public for a ride and pretending that they had stuff that they were going to show and never showing up in the skiff for Congress and all the rest of it, and taking that whole manipulation to ultimate levels with some of the main characters like Chris Mellon and others. We'll remember the name of that guy before we're done tonight, the producer. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Jerry Gary is his
Oh,
name.
Goldsmith? Or something like that?
No, he just
Bruckheimer.
yes.
Okay.
Bingo.
Mhm.
And and they know how to make great movies, but unfortunately the advisors and the co-directors on that are all CIA people.
Well, it's interesting. Movies have been superheroes for a long time, and they just
Yes.
it's dead as a genre. And I
Yeah,
mean,
oh yeah.
the only way you can really make money from movies is a blockbuster. What is a bigger blockbuster than UFOs and aliens, right? It's time
Well,
for a comeback.
But do you know what a big deal it would be if they had the real thing going on and they weren't
Mhm.
just taking the intelligence community talking points? This is the crucial difference. That's the split. It's the fork in the road. It is the CIA UFO disclosure circus, or it's the UFO file, the dark journalism, the real thing about what you're going to get with it. That's really the fork in the road. And we've come up to this fork, and I started to think that wall was collapsing on their side because there were people that were going down and they couldn't do the UFO hearings and all the rest. But now I'm thinking they regrouped, and that's when that whole promotion of Nolan, that they're coming in through Lobe and Nolan now, which is like, we're going to use the sophisticated set, and we're going to, but they're touting the same UFO threat nonsense. What's interesting to me, and you can take this on the record. Okay. Now, I've said two things about Nolan, which are important. One, he's best friends with Dr. Fauci and salutes him online. Proven fact. That's all there is to it. Two, that he works for the Central Intelligence Agency. Proven fact. It's in his own bio. That's the end of that. But the third thing I think that's interesting about him, and he has a lot of unusual connections, but he also claims to be a contactee. And this is something that the CIA has been doing here, which is they've been saying, well, look, we have John Ramirez, and he's a CIA agent, worked in deep projects and on as an agent for years. But guess what? He's also a UFO contactee. Wasn't that nice? So you take that away from the public too. Jim Semivan, 25 years at the highest level of the intelligence CIA directorate. He launched TTSA. He was their he's basically the co-CEO. And he says, well, I'm a contactee. These beings contacted me. So CIA contactees. There has to be a limit to what we'll accept in terms of the malarkey coming from that
I'm
end
just
of it.
curious, have they gone into the stories of their supposed content?
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, of course, is the 39 now people in Congress and the Senate who've also come forward and been like, we need to get the truth about the UFO and all this stuff. Somebody in the background is whispering there, and they're saying, the UAP train is coming. Just promote this whole line of what we're doing, and you'll be in the riches, because when you unleash that technology on the public, there are going to be all kinds of financial opportunities involved with it. The problem is the secrecy aspect and the way that it's launched, and the fact that the public has paid for it for over 100 years in America in particular, but certainly around the world. And as a result of that, there's no real representation at all. But I found it particularly pernicious, especially after the great work that's been done around abductees with people like John Mack and others. And I think that some of those intelligence agencies also took advantage of some of the fact that those numbers were dwindling about the abductions. And that is actually very fascinating and something very important for people on the UFO side to study, which is, where are the abduction cases? What has gone down with the amount of abduction cases? And is it possible that the groups that were doing this, either off world or from
Underground.
Earth,
Mhm.
that they got too exposed and they're just like, this is bringing us too much attention? Or did they do all this before things got really bad with the geoengineering and on the pharmaceutical side? Aha, there's something to consider there.
That's
Indeed.
my theory.
Excellent. What do you got back there?
Dominic Sean McCann says, so the usual suspects will be headlining on September 9th. Surely she can subpoena Inman or the heads of research of the aerospace cartels. Anyone, in fact, apart from the Mellon farce crew.
I agree. Mellon farce crew. I like that. Well, I call it the Mellon camp. So it's John Cougar, Chris Mellon camp. That's really true. I'll tell you what's interesting about Luna. Luna and Burchett, they could do wonderful things with these committees. They do have the ability to do that. I don't count them out completely, but there's now a window because that whole thing is over October 1st. Committee, the T-class thing. And they had pretty lukewarm Kennedy ones. I'm not going to lie. They could have really brought the JFK and UFO thing together in Congress. That would have exploded the whole thing. And some of the things that we've put on the record, they could have explored in terms of Lloyd Berkner and others. We did do a lot on Joannidis, and they did bring out some things about Joannidis, got that at least. But the UFO committees, they suffered from skiff flu, that every time, these people would go before Congress, they'll say, "Oh, I can't say that, ma'am. Ma'am, I can't put that on the record," said Elizondo. "But don't worry, you put me in the skiff and I'll do it." And then when they would call them into a skiff and arrange it, they'd say, "I have the flu." And it happened over and over and over again. So as part of their program for doing this, there are some splits in the background on that. And I think that they've kind of back-ended Elizondo for a while because he was such a disaster in public. And the book was so terrible, imminent, But what I will say is they have to, take it seriously on a much deeper level. And some of the things we heard from Luna when she was being interviewed about it was she was saying, "Oh yeah, I'm convinced it's fallen angels." Look, you're a congressperson, you don't have the ability to tell the public that it's fallen angels. You're not a mystic, you're not a religious person. So just can that. You got nothing to do with any of that. You're a congressperson. What's the truth around the secrecy about UFOs inside the government? And the way you do that is by using subpoena power to get those answers, even if the answers are historical at first, and then eventually, it brings it up to modern times. But just touting philosophies and religion things to appeal to a certain crowd or to fears among Christians about aliens or something, that's not doing the public any service at all. And Burleson is on that train too. Somebody is instructing those people to do that. And so I would blow that off completely. And I think Burleson shows up as somebody who's really manipulating the progress. He is a congressman from Missouri on the Republican side, but he seems to be naive and falling for everything on purpose. He's the guy. He's become the kind of conspiracy guy. I expect him to show up with a Bigfoot T-shirt. And but Luna, I still hold hope out for her because I know that she has some understanding of what's happening in the background there. And Burchett, he could do it. He's wishy-washy. He really is genuinely wishy-washy. But if you want to do it, guys, you have the ability to do it. In those 30 days, you could revolutionize the whole thing. What to do is merge the JFK hearings on the assassination side with the UFO file hearings. And I can give you the list of people to subpoena. As you know, I've sent a letter to the Speaker of the House, and so on, and so on.
Can I throw this in here?
Yes.
Telzilla says Luna could dig into secret bids and contracts. Seems like that is the very first thing they could do if they were genuine.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there are a number of different approaches around this. One of them is that, look, it's understood. One of the things I try to outline when explaining this is that in the 1950s, when Eisenhower had a stroke, list it sometimes as a heart attack, sometimes as a stroke, but because of what Nixon said about that he couldn't put sentences together and things, that leads me to believe that it was, a neural problem. But anyway, during that 2-month period, Nixon became the president for Ike. He was the acting president. And during that period of time, he moved a lot of that UFO file technology, progress, and all the rest into corporate America. So that's where you get that shadowy corridor, which would stand up dramatically as the X-Protect group, who really, influences from the intelligence groups on one hand and on the shadowy corporate side on the other. This is international, but it was centered on the American redevelopment and re-engineering, reverse engineering of the UFO file. So when that happened, it got more and more out of Ike's hands to the point where he threatened to send some troops in if they didn't start giving him reports on this. And by the time you can hear it at the end of his presidency, he's handing things off to Kennedy with this incredible speech about don't let the military industrial complex rule the situation. We can't be manipulated by this, which is incredible considering this is the guy who won World War II for us. And he's warning about the people who are in charge of this military juggernaut. And it was a good warning because when President Kennedy got in, he also had the same fears and doubts about that military industrial complex. And it is, in fact, upon his assassination, a month to the day, that Harry Truman, who created the Central Intelligence Agency, was really maneuvered into that, writes this incredible essay and puts it out as an editorial in the Washington Post, which says, CIA is, this is not what I created it for, and they're damaging our reputation, either mend it or end it, basically. And it's a very powerful statement. So you have major presidential forces, Eisenhower, Truman, and JFK, all pushing against this thing. And the thing had gone so big and had so much power that, the dedicated battle ended in gunfire at that point. So that's the real Civil War. That's the follow-up Civil War in American history. And Robert Kennedy ends up being the Attorney General who becomes Senator of New York. He ends up being another casualty in that battle. So these are the things that took place in that period. But what happened to the UFO file in there was a major key, a major aspect about how to handle it. And Kennedy's plans to share it with the Russians become, as you've seen in my documentaries and in my reporting, the key reason, in my opinion, for his removal. So when you see a lot of CIA people around the UFO file now, there's no reason to think that they've reformed at all in 60 years. So they're still playing that big secrecy game, and now they want to play a major game of influence, and that's the key. That's what we're going to get into tonight in this special episode, which is X Series 203. This is Dark Journalist at a very deep level. The Space Cage, UFO file, Lockheed Takeover, Niebuhr Mystery. We're going to be taking your questions in the second part of the program. I also want to remind you, if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That is a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through the massive censorship we've experienced on this channel because of the things that we cover. If you are on that newsletter list, which is free, you will get all the announcements about the exciting shows that we have coming up for you, interviews off the charts. Wait till you see that September lineup. It'll blow your mind. And also documentaries. We have the incredible Pyramid X and Hot Zone series, which is all about that hidden aspect of Atlantean ruins coming to the fore and playing a real game on the geopolitical side. Pyramid X and the Craze in the Hot Zone, and also JFK and the UFO file, all of those miniseries that we're working on with a fantastic team. If you've seen those documentaries, of course, they're available right here on this channel. And so that whole miniseries coming forward for you, events, it's all there in the newsletter. So stand up and be counted and sign up for that newsletter. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Evan Hudson says, in James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable, he makes the case that JFK was murdered for his sometimes covert overtures to the USSR for peace. The UFO aspect fits in perfectly with that.
Well, there's no question that the peace speech in, Peter Dale Scott, I think, is the best JFK historian in the grand scheme of things. And he makes the case that the speech at American universities would cost President Kennedy his life. Because what he said was, what kind of a peace do we want and what kind of a peace do I seek? Not a Pax Americana informed, imposed on the world by American weapons of war. We need to re-examine our attitude towards the Russians. And the final analysis, we can't afford to have a nuclear exchange where even the fruits of victory will be ashes in our mouth. This kind of thing, where he's saying, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we're all mortal, that transcends all of the let's get the Reds stuff that was going on then, just like you get a lot of the rhetoric now And, with the Ukraine Russian situation and with others, you see that military thing over and over again. So what Kennedy was doing there was he was saying peace is the goal, and they instantly thought that was anathema. The other thing that he did, which was extraordinary, is not quite understood, but the nuclear test ban treaty meant both nations were not going to test nuclear weapons in the atmosphere anymore, which was gigantic because the risks that were involved with the things that they were doing were exceptional. And so Kennedy knew, and he put it across, and he said, we're not going to do it. And he said, we'll take the step unilaterally. We'll do it on our own first. You guys will join us. And Khrushchev was like, this guy, I didn't take him seriously, this young playboy, but look at all these policies. So there's a lot that plays in with that. I guess the last thing I want to say before we get past the current intelligence manipulation of the UFO file in the public has to do with the presence of a couple of people. And James Clapper, another one of these people in intelligence who plays that role in the UFO file, who is somebody who's out there manipulating the subject. And I pointed out for years, of course, that he was the one who was behind Lou Elizondo and others. And all of the Lou people, or were they bots on Twitter that were just bought by the intelligence community? We'll never really know. All would say, no, he has nothing to do with Clapper and everything. And then he puts in his own book this great relationship that he has with Clapper, who he worked for. And then, the final denouement is Elizondo, the phony UFO whistleblower, with his controller, James Clapper. The whole thing was an intelligence operation. So the people who were into that were duped. Now, one of the things, I got some quotes from Clapper, so we get some idea of where he is on this topic in public, because we know in private he's one of the people driving the UFO threat narrative, because ultimately the threat piece gives them the ability to create a sky event and create emergency powers as a result of that, which is the goal here. And also the unleashing of this incredible X-Tech, by the breakaway group, and they have the ability to run that. So they'll be able to break back in as it. Among other notable media coverage received over the weekend, all of which was discussed, had been by the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who acknowledged more than just the UAP topic, but also the culture of secrecy that the U.S. government has maintained about it for the last several decades. This is Newsweek. Saying it was logical for the U.S. intelligence community to be addressing UFOs. Clapper also said he was unsure as to why there had been such official secrecy in relation to this subject in the past. Really important that whenever we witness such phenomena, Clapper told CNN, that it's recorded and documented for the future, that we may gather more information and have a better understanding for what's transpiring. So the king of transparency is James Clapper now. I got some other competitors for that role around the UFO file. It's just going to make us wonder what is going on here. Chuck Schumer still wants to tell you what the government knows about UFOs, okay? Former Senate Majority Leader, paragon of virtue, and general New York politician, Schumer, he's the one who has the lead in the UAP disclosure. He's the one who is leading with all of that legislation and trying to attach it to the National Defense Authorization Act. That is a UFO defense office that they're trying to build in. And when I've discussed that NDAA in the past, just so we know and we understand what it is, every year the president, whoever it is, whether it was Obama, Bush, Biden, or Trump, has to sign on to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is about $1 trillion on the record anyway. God knows how much on the black budget background. But he has to sign on to that. And the way that it works is if there's something in there that he doesn't like and he objects to, it slows down the whole thing. So nobody gets their money. So everyone freaks out. It's like, where's that $1 trillion? So there's an incredible pressure campaign that builds into it. And that's how they got Arrow included in the NDAA. And that was done by New York Senator Gillibrand. Now, this time around, it's Schumer, and he's attaching this UFO disclosure thing. Well, it's actually called the UAP disclosure legislation. And he's trying to attach it to that 2026 NDAA. So there's a lot of slippery stuff going on there. They know something on the Senate side. These figures know something. The close to 40 House members and senators that I've noted that are speaking openly out there about UFOs, like Ruben Galejo, the senator in Arizona, who they're now talking about running for president in 2028. Well, it's very interesting. Keep that date in mind for the next thing I'm going to tell you around all this. But yeah, suffice to say, something is going on in that background. And of course, Lobe himself is another one that tweeting out these little things about 3i Atlas, because that also brings on the Sky event. It brings on the threat from beyond. And he's saying, oh, look, this thing for sure is an alien spacecraft. No, for sure it's not. So, it is definitely a comet and an unusual one. But why are they doing this? This is why this is so important for us to get our heads wrapped around it. Remember what we started with, Gary Nolan and the CIA. Well, we can get around to what they're doing, but it makes it harder when that whole pop click podcast world celebrates the CIA invading this stuff. So it's going to be a clash. And so we're definitely using some noisemakers here. What do you got?
General Meow Meow says disinformation is like capitalism. It just has to keep growing or the whole thing crumbles. And Austin Temple says Trump needs to call in Daniel to get this stuff sorted out.
Oh, well, Trump is he's in a very interesting position, and I'm going to discuss his moves to take over there or buy in to Lockheed Martin is a very sophisticated move around taking the UFO file back under presidential control. However, it is fraught with peril to do such a thing also. And I'll explain why as we go forward here in this special X series episode 203, the Space Cage, Lockheed Takeover, UFO file, and the Nebra mystery. We're going to take your questions, like I said, in the second half of the program. And we'll go a couple hours with you here tonight. I'm going to jump in here. And there's also a couple of things from last week around FDR on the presidential side that I promised to get to because a few people had emailed me and asked me what was the answer on that final piece about FDR. And there's so many dangling pieces from last week's episode, which was explosive, but we'll address some of those tonight too. And so I'm going to read some quotes here about a missile defense system that we were planning on setting up in 1984, and it's going to be an interesting thing that we're setting up part 2 of that now, because there was a UFO reason then, there's a UFO reason now. But before I do that, what else you got?
I'd like to get to this right away. Channeling the Heart, Barbara Joyce was asking, hey, Olivia, is DJ going to do anything on 3i Atlas? Allegedly, Edgar Casey said that on 10/29/25, there would be a catastrophic cosmic event affecting the whole planet, but not extinction. I went and I looked at the YouTube videos on this, and it's all,
AI.
Well,
yeah. Well, let me say this first of all. I'll answer your first question, then I want you to tell me the rest of that. There are no prophecies from Edgar Casey relating to any date around 2025. And I can tell you that as a student of the Casey readings for many, many years. There are predictions, all the way up through 2100 and all the rest. There's lots of predictions of Earth changes. There's lots of predictions time-wise for things like pole shifts and when they start, even including the years 1936, setting off a process that goes on as a gradual process for humanity. But you have to be very, very careful of things unless they have the reading number attached. Usually the whole Casey predictions online thing, some of them that you can take to the bank that you do see around are the ones where he said, through Russia comes the hope of the world. And what he's getting at there is there's some spiritual revolution that takes place in Russia at some point in this century that is going to revolutionize thought. So this is what Casey predicted. And there's a number of interesting things that he predicted in terms of the fact that the one world currency would set off wars. So those things are real. And but the whole thing about, Three Eye Atlas and that, there's no Casey reading about that. Yes.
Yeah, so it's doom or clickbait, and they're conflating
Yes.
things, right?
Right.
Things that they know will happen with a lie about what
Yeah.
Casey predicted.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
for
Well,
profit.
yeah, for profit. Look, they've been doing that with Casey for the sleeping prophet for profit, right? They've been doing that with Casey since the National Enquirer in the 50s, right? But I will say this, that Casey, instead of just looking at him as somebody who predicted things, it's that he was showing us trends for preparation. Just like Rudolf Steiner was saying, Armand. It's my contention that Steiner spent 4 decades telling us about Armand and that whole force that was going to come through the scientific materialism, coming through the technology, and the face-off between the Ahrimanic dark astral force and humanity, and that we couldn't be caught asleep to all this and just taking in the technology without really understanding its purpose. And remembering that I'm a very pro-technology person. After all, I, was the editor for a very popular tech magazine for a decade. Okay. So technology and its latest innovations, and a lot of people in that field, I know quite well. So, and I'm very excited about what it can do. The problem is, just like when you hear about them clearing the forests in Canada and all that, and if somebody wants to go walking in a forest, they're going to get fined and put in jail and stuff. It's because they want to clear those places because they want to set up centers, and they want to get rid of the farming because they want to set up centers. So they don't care so much about humanity and if we get fed and farms and things that are, ecologically good for the planet. They want to support those AI centers, which demand a tremendous amount of energy that they're not telling you about, and they demand a tremendous amount of water. So these are the facts. And, we also, something that should happen, I think, in the grand scheme of things here, is there should be an ethical guardrail in relation to AI that says, you can have, let's say, 25% of the jobs replaced over the course of 2 decades by artificial intelligence. And we can bring that change in gradually, but you cannot take all the jobs, and you can't even take half of them. That should be the ethical guardrail going in, and that should be an entirely political movement of humanity versus the machines. And they'll say, you're trying to stop progress and all the rest of it. No, that's corporate profits. Come on, get real. How many corporate profit-taking moves have we seen? And this is another one. Also, the technology is not at a point where we should hand over anything to it, as it makes dramatic errors and flips out a lot, as we've seen. And, all the way back to James Cameron's fever dream of the Terminator, we've seen they've given us the heads up that there's going to be something very, very deep. The problems, the perils that are involved need to be addressed in a very sober manner. And the idea of just running over a cliff with AI is not good. I do think those forces are exerting tremendous pressure politically right now, and there is going to be a reckoning in relation to that. And I think that Peter Thiel's influence is going to be, the rubber's going to meet the road there. And I want to say that Peter Thiel is also manipulating the UFO field and creating the whole extraterrestrial. He's been studying, how people worship religion. He's been calling in religious leaders because he wants to create and stage a false ET worship piece. So he's another centralizer, and he has people in this field that work for him. And, we've pointed them out over time, but Thiel has too much influence here, and that needs to be exposed as well. So
he's getting exposed.
It is happening. It is happening. What else you got?
Okay, so along the lines of what you're about to present, Kelzilla says Kelly Johnson, Ben Rich were the guys who made Lockheed the legend that we know. Did DJ identify who would have picked up the mantle for the Skunk Works projects? And Scarlet Fire says Lockheed has the patents for the nuclear powered underground boring machines that build DUMBs.
Oh yeah, they have a lot more than that, but they're involved on that end. What I'm particularly concerned about is their space takeover and their role in building the Golden Dome, because the Golden Dome has a lot of issues in it. So let's walk back into the past, deep about 40 years ago, and how this whole thing came up during a moment of political peril between the United States and the Soviet Union. Out of the blue, in March of 1983, President Reagan gave one of those incredible fireside chat TV presentations, which he was so good at. And if you go back and watch those clips, you can see why they called him the great communicator, because he is dramatically good, so much better than other people of that era, like Carter and stuff. How did Carter even get in? It's tough. He's a nice guy. He was a smart guy, but he was not particularly good at communication. But Reagan was all communication. He did a fantastic job with it. But he sits down and he says, we need to put together this strategic defense initiative, and it'll be a shield for the United States against these incoming missiles. And we will also, with our scientific community, share that material with the Soviet Union. Aha. Well, this was a dramatic thing to say, but what was behind it really? Did Reagan really want a shield against nuclear missiles, or was something else going on here? When you look at the work of Philip Corso, who I think left some dramatic things hanging out there before his death, I do feel that he brought some very important things to bear. And one of those things that he brought to bear in the middle of all this was what Star Wars, SDI, was really all about. I'm going to read a little bit of what Corso had to say. And of course, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso was somebody who was the protege of General Trudeau and was on the Security Council briefings with Eisenhower, JFK, and others. This guy was deep in NATO, and you know, there have been a lot of things said about Corso because of the Roswell book. There were so many people who thought, was it real and all the rest. What I can tell you is, in all kinds of different literature historically that I've looked into that dealt with the Cold War, if Corso pops up without these people knowing anything about the Roswell book he's going to write later, and he pops up as a very key individual in the middle of the Cold War. So let's keep that in mind as we go along. Here's a few things he had to say. And of course, that's one of the depictions of what they found there at Roswell, the crash saucer. And the story holds up more dramatically the closer you look at it. That's why we're doing this Roswell Reignited series, where I've put things on the record about Roswell which have never been put out before, including the fact that the officer who goes in to the Texas School Book Depository and finds the Oswald rifle, Eugene Boone, he is also the person who becomes the head of the Foster Ranch for all of their businesses for the Fosters, who owned the Foster Ranch where the Roswell UFO crashed. This historical overlay between the JFK assassination and the Roswell incident with this one individual figure is just too dramatic. And, the way they dropped him into the police department after he was an advertising executive who was friends with Jack Ruby, an extraordinary story that we're telling in that Roswell Reignited. And we're already up to episode 3 on that. So please do look forward to what we have for you there in the fall on Roswell Reignited. Here's what Corso had to say. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I may have stepped on the toes of some of the most powerful people in Washington, but it was still the good fight, and I was above all still a soldier in the Cold War, and still fighting the stealth war about the strategies of the extraterrestrial biological entity. They use EBE throughout that whole book. They were becoming more aggressive in their appearances over defense installations, cities, and our manned and unmanned space probes. Even the Russian intelligence services had begun to complain about the mysterious goings-on with their space probes, but they couldn't come right out and tell us the reasons why. We had to figure out those for ourselves. If the Cold War sounded complex and chaotic in the early 60s as Kennedy juggled the strategies of Truman and Eisenhower while recognizing that he couldn't trust his own intelligence services, boy, is that an understatement. Imagine what it was like when you factored in the other Cold War, or as some have called it, the real Cold War against the extraterrestrial. It was becoming like the elephant in the room that everybody knows is there but keeps denying it. Its presence is so massive that you have to walk around it. Its trunk swings with such force that you have to duck when it sweeps over your head. So what he's getting at here in that first quote is, while we are battling against the Russians and in this, Cold War scenario, whether it's in Central America, South America, Europe, Berlin, and all the rest, in the 50s and 60s, when Kennedy is in there, there's another thing to think of and deal with, which is there are these craft that they know are there. There are these craft that they've picked up their crashed vehicles and re-examined them. They know that something else is operative there. Their satellite system is sent up there to track it. They have to simultaneously keep their discoveries out of the hands of their enemies and keep the public away from what they're doing. So whenever the public or researchers around the public get close, they discredit them. And when presidents get into it, they have to invoke executive action if they are in the CIA X-Protect group. And I should say that X-Protect is that group I've identified that's right in between the aerospace companies that are private over here and the intelligence communities that are part of the government. So in that shadowy corridor, they exist and operate. So you couldn't really call them an essential part of the government. They are a shadow group balanced somewhere between the two. All right, more from Lieutenant Colonel Corso. Generals Twining and Vandenberg had had enough. In 1952, the Air Force formally initiated Project Blue Book. At least if we weren't going to do any things about UFOs publicly, we had to have a way to salve the public's fear about UFO sightings. Blue Book was the salve. Whatever the working group was supposed to be doing in 1952, it wasn't satisfying the National Security Council, which ordered the CIA to determine whether the existence of UFOs would create a danger to the United States. That's behind the scenes. Now, what's interesting is the person who heads up that panel, even though it's called the Robertson panel, is Lloyd Berkner, who's the same person that President Kennedy is going to see on the day he's assassinated. He's headed to the Trade Mart to have a fantastic speech with physicist Berkner. So it's important, I think, for us to keep him in that context. Of course, the CIA already knew because two of its intelligence directors had been members of the working group around UFOs. UFOs were displaying hostile intentions not only in the United States, but to the Soviets, the Italians, and Scandinavians. Well, isn't that unusual? All of NATO are trying to figure out a response to the UFO threat, underlined, watch that, without triggering a reaction from the Russians. That was one of the reasons 30 years later, President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev could come to a meeting of the minds about UFOs that ultimately brought an end to the need for the Cold War. Think about the impact and the emphasis that Corso is saying here, that it is the meeting of the minds of Gorbachev and Reagan that stopped the Cold War. And it was over the UFO file because they realized we can't fight each other with this other stuff going on. Now, here's what's interesting about all that, which is Gorbachev, as I've said before, went on the record in 2012 and gave this whole speech about how at Reykjavik, Reagan came to him and said, will you help us if this turns into a battle with the UFO forces and we join together and do this? So it's on the record. Therefore, it's not a theoretical thing. Did it happen? Did they out? No, they talked about it. Just like Kennedy and Khrushchev talked about it. Just like Trump and Putin talked about it. So the quicker that we get on board with that from here, the better off we understand the whole story. Otherwise, we're like children who hear rumors of things, but Gorbachev did us all a tremendous favor and put that on the record. Now, what does it mean? It's very important what Corso is saying here. He's saying that Star Wars, which they developed as a missile shield from space that would zap nukes that were incoming, was actually designed as a UFO grid. And that this was the big joining of the minds of the Russians and the Americans. And that what happened was the technology, when the Cold War collapsed, the technology went underground. Everyone assumed, the need for SDI went away. No, they utilized it. They developed it for sure. And in my opinion, they deployed it. So that's where you get all of the pieces around the secret space program. Now, if we go a little further, the final quotes on Corso, which will set up what I'm going to do about Lockheed and Trump here shortly, will give us the rest of the hints of what's going on here. The full story behind SDI Star Wars and the way it changed the Cold War and forced the extraterrestrials to change their strategies for this planet is a story that's never been told. But as spectacular and fantastic as it may sound, the story behind the limited deployment of SDI is the story of how humanity won its first victory against a more powerful and technologically superior enemy who discovered, to whatever version of shock it experienced, that there was real trouble down on its farm. Now, this is through the eyes of a military man, of course. But what he's basically saying is the efforts to ward off this apparently, far superior technological force. The fact that we put things in position in place to demonstrate what we could do. And the fast program of the redevelopment of the technology of theirs that we discovered played a part. And all this is out of the public eye. It shows up in movies, it shows up in sci-fi books, but you cannot in that era especially get your hands on the tangible aspects of it. Now we have more of a window, which is why the situation is that much more manipulated, but it gets better. And I'm going to show you how as we get into the next section of this powerful Dark Journalist X series 203. This is the Space Cage UFO file. Lockheed Takeover with the Nebra mystery lingering in the background. We're going to be taking your questions also here shortly. Let's see. I'm running almost on time.
That's amazing.
What do you got?
Evan Hudson says, so SAIC and Battelle Labs are part of what DJ calls X-Protect?
Well, there's a number of groups scientifically and in the defense contractor deployment and development that serve many purposes. So there are X-Protect groups that work in league with the intelligence community and the aerospace. They are accountable. They are not accountable to the government. They are accountable to these forces between Intel and the defense contractors, which makes them extra constitutional. If you want a hint about extra constitutional, think about Homeland Security. Homeland Security, it's really quite remarkable. 275,000 employees. The thing did not exist before 9/11. How do you accrue 275,000 employees? Even the CIA only has 35,000. So that's an entirely extra constitutional agency envisioned by those in power, set up as a bureaucracy, and we're off to the races. So the same thing exists in the background. The X-Protect group is small and incredibly influential. The power that they hold because they wield the secrecy around that technology for the most powerful players on the planet, they are engaged in a long game in the UFO file. There are aspects and factions in relation to this. One of those aspects says, keep the secrecy forever. The other one says, no, we can dangle it out and use it all to our advantage. That's the one that's moving, that's on the move right now. And they're trying to prove, hey, we can use this whole thing that we've co-opted. We'll co-opt the narrative. We'll spin it our way. We'll create a sky event. It'll be even better for us. And we'll be able to roll out the technology because we're fighting those those darn aliens. And you know what? We did it with the public's money, and we're heroes because they were demons. They were fallen angels. Oh, they were coming after us. So they have a lot planned there. And I think the big problem that they've realized is the Christian community in many ways. Looking at this has a more frank approach, and they're trying to figure out how can we get them on board with all this. And that's part of the problem, I think, that they've really hit a wall with. And I think what they've decided to do is dangle this thing about fallen angels out there. But look, in World War II, when our fighters would do these different maneuvers and things, the Foo Fighters, those UFOs, would show up and mimic them. They would mimic the different directions and things that they were doing, and then they would outperform them, go higher than they could, and disappear. Some of our astronauts from our own Apollo program, when they were on maneuvers, in the early 50s, getting their training, they saw this. Gordon Cooper famously saw them, and he said, "Oh, they're under intelligent control, whoever's operating them, for sure. They can outperform us dramatically. They don't have, lift propulsion or anything like that. They are disc shaped. They can do whatever they want. And when they take off, it's like they just disappear. So they're beyond time and space, right?" Now, they've witnessed, those astronauts and those witnesses have seen this. So if you are looking like that, what does that have to do with any argument about spirituality or anything? That's just technical performance, zimzamming, way beyond anything we can imagine. So that's one aspect of this. Now, if you really want to apprehend the UFO aspect and really understand what it's all about, you do have to go into legitimate psychic practice to figure it out and also to interface with it. That's another thing that they learned. So, but you see, there's two aspects to this when they're dangling the superstitious thing about fallen angels and stuff. Just think about the Foo Fighters, because that'll give you a real clear idea. Whatever it was technical, like we were technical, and we grew as a culture to a point to be able to do this. We just rediscovered the technology. The question really is, was it an off-world civilization coming here that's far more advanced? And are they scientific groups, which is what seems likely? Also, is there something here that in our earlier stage developed incredible technology? There's evidence for this in a lot of mystery school texts, if you know how to read them. And they're telling us, oh yeah, humanity had this ability and they fought each other and, sent down lightning bolts on each other from the air and all that. All those stories on the Hindu Vedic side, the stories from the Mayans, those things come together so well. So, it's not required to have ancient aliens for everything. You could have the incredible Atlantis civilization with its incredible technology. What did Casey say about it? He said, when they asked him about it, what could those ships do? And he said, oh, they could fly in the highest part of the atmosphere. And not only that, but they could fly through things, dematerialization. What kind of advancement technologically is that? Think on that level, and then we get some hint of what was going on there in our ancient past. Yes.
I never grokked this until just now, but I don't know where this would fit in with any kind of text, ancient text, but because everybody's talking about shifting to 5D.
Yes.
And what that would look like and how we'd experience it. But I'm wondering at some point if we were obviously higher dimensional beings that were more light bodies, whether there's only a certain segment of the population that actually downgraded into 3D.
Yes.
And that we have been slowly trying to move our way up. So they've been in 5D this whole time, operating in this higher dimensional space.
Yeah. Well, you could have groups that operate in lower dimensional space and higher that are a little bit better at what we're doing and a little bit worse. So, it is interesting when you get into it. Also, we are thinking entirely physical about this, which may be a little bit of a problem in the grand scheme of things. When you are talking about things that may be more suited for realm, thinking in realms, what realms do these things occupy? And of course, we have entire histories about elementals and other things. That's a realm, and it's only apprehended by us in the most kind of super spiritual state. It's not the kind of thing, in our normal everyday state, it might even be the kind of thing that would drive someone crazy if they saw elementals. But, there are people who retain this incredible psychic gift that they can see them. Edgar Casey famously saw them when he was gardening all the time, interacted with them constantly. Was he talking to himself or was he dealing with elementals? Well, we'll never know, but it seems more like he was talking to elementals. That would be my guess. Okay. Lockheed Martian.
Let's
Are you
hear it.
ready for this? All right. By the way, it's a little setup on that September 9th UFO hearing. This was from 2023. Exclusive 6 whistleblowers who claim they worked on military UFO programs, retrieving and analyzing crash material have come forward to spill their secrets to senior members of Congress. The whistleblowers claim they worked on Roswell-style UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs and have spoken to members of Congress. And they were like, we want a watchdog charity and all this stuff, right? Okay. How about this for a retread? That was 2 years ago. Have you heard anything significant from any of those people? No. 6 whistleblowers claim they worked on military UFO retrieval. Nothing happened. Zip. That's the game that these people keep playing. I'm going to tell you, it's all in the skiff by the book. Go along with the CIA UFO disclosure. That's the problem. You have to smash the op in order to go forward, or it's going to recycle news. We're going to have that headline on September 9th, but we already had it back in 2023. We had it earlier too. And they rolled it out during COVID, let's not forget. Okay. Pentagon is shareholder. This is important. Trump, the Golden Dome, buying Lockheed Martin. Here's one of the quick things for us to understand. Lockheed Martin is probably, as a private contractor, is probably the largest repository of UFO artifacts. Now, Boeing and Northrop and others have their share for sure. We, on the government side, whether it's Wright-Patterson and these other major places, what used to be Area 51, about Moon, Pennsylvania, that's a tremendous amount of technological information and a tremendous amount of secret programs that have been experimented with, going all the way back to the testimony of physicist Robert Sarbarker. Now, Trump is saying, with the Space Force, I was trying to get the UFO file back under executive control. This is what Kennedy was trying to do in 1963. And he had tried different things to do it. He even showed up at a base in Florida that was famous for having these crashed saucers and bodies and things of this nature. He just showed up for a tour out of nowhere. That's Kennedy. This is how he would shake things up. I'm the president. Let me in. And that's McGill. And it's interesting too, because I think with Trump, he has studied Kennedy's presidency very, very deeply. And that's why I think you're seeing that he was good friends with JFK Jr. and how Bobby got adopted into the fold, as it were. This is a picture of Trump who staged an auction for Kennedy's late secretary, Evelyn Lincoln. That is Trump in 1997 sitting in JFK's rocking chair. This is somebody operating with a lot of knowledge of Kennedy and what was going on there. Of course, his close friendship with Richard Nixon is something we revealed here before anybody knew about it. And 4 years after we put it out on the record, the Nixon archives, we have 300 letters between them. Nobody knew. We knew because we did the research. And this is the advantage, in a sense, of the work that we do in the X series. If you would research it right, you're going to get those answers, and then the confirmations will come. So like we were talking about in the beginning, all the things that flow around the UFO thing, if you stick to the facts, you're going to get more extraordinary things because you're going to get out of your own imagination and the crazy imagination of, I don't know, Gaia TV and the blue chickens and all the rest. So we have to keep that in mind. The reality itself is way, way over, beyond. Now, the Golden Dome. Okay, remember what Corso said about Star Wars. Now look at the plans for the Golden Dome. This is a $300 billion project. Do you know when it's scheduled for its first test? The week of the election of 2028. What does that tell you? Somehow the test for the Golden Dome is related to the power structure. And also what it is set up for, the dual purpose of, is this something that is just set up to block those hypersonic missiles coming in from, say, North Korea or Russia or China? And in particular, we know that Russia has. These other countries, of course, will develop them. So here's another thought about it, which is it also set up maybe to differentiate? Like, here's a UFO and here's a hypersonic missile. I'll zap that. I won't zap that. Also, in terms of that space traffic that they're seeing, they're becoming very live up there. The infrastructure has really kicked in. We've had people on this program who've said they already have boots on Mars. I believe it. Because the problem is 53 years between moon visits is too long. If you go to the testimony in his own autobiography of Gordon Cooper, he said he got tapped on the shoulder by Werner von Braun in 1966 and said, "Get yourself fit. You're going to Mars. You're going to lead the program." So at a certain point, von Braun came to him and said, "Not only are we not doing the Mars project, but I don't want you to ever say anything about it." And then in the early 70s, after Cooper was, helped get them to the moon and everything, but then he was like, I'm sick of what is going on here at NASA. And he becomes basically an archaeologist in Central America. And you know what I think about all of the people who've been astronauts who switched down to going through, say, ancient ruins and things, is they've seen things from space that they've been instructed to look for in the hot zone and other places. But that's another episode. So Cooper, he hears in 71, oh, they're working on that Mars mission. They're actually planning to do it, though it's going to be a decade from now. They're going to launch the whole thing in 1981. He hears it from a number of people, the setup, the structure, and all the rest of it. He expects news reports and all this other stuff to flow. Nothing. He doesn't hear anything. That's an entirely separate program. And then he is fond of saying there's a military program around space, and then there's NASA's program. That's his split for the secret space program. Kennedy, look at the records that came out in 2014. Blue Gemini, this is the key thing. We've put it on the record. Blue is that program. We told you in March of 2023, the program, the secrecy, the UFO file, the actual name to search for in those records is Blue. The government came out with Blue a year later. And by the way, after I put that on the record, a number of these different counterintelligence people came to me and said, it's great, to talk with you, and I'll bounce this idea and that off you. By the way, how did you know the name of the thing was Blue? So this is, again, that research angle. If you get it, you can get all kinds of answers going if you put that together with the things that people are telling you. But that Blue piece is so, so important. And we brought it in through the documentary, Blue Enigma. Now, let's go even a little bit deeper with this. The government admits, and they say, yeah, we had a program. It was called Blue, Kona Blue, but, it was set up for crash retrievals, but we never had any crashes, so we never used it. Just forget about that. Forget about Dark Journalist and what he was talking about. And those crazy kids online. Now, Wall Street Journal in last summer here, in the summer that we're in, a month ago, they put out a whole article that freaks that UFO world out, saying, you know what? It's not UFOs. It's just a bunch of government projects, military projects hidden under different names. And they did that whole trip. And the idea was, hey, we'll put the genie back in the bottle and nobody will know. and it wasn't very well researched, and it got a lot of flack. And there were guys from like the Black Vault and others that they talked to, and they decided, you know, we can't use any of that. So they talked to them for hours and hours, get all this information from them, and then don't use that, you know, just use whatever their spin is. But one of the things they came forward and said in that was that there was a program that they would haze new recruits with, pretending that there was a UFO file when there wasn't, which is complete bunk. But nonetheless, the Wall Street Journal put this article out. Guess what the name of that program was? Yankee Blue.
Hmm?
There's the blue stamp again. Even in the caricature, blue is there again. And the whole Kona thing, you know, nobody could figure out what the code was. But I had the code before they put the whole thing out. And the code was Kingman, Ossining, Nellis, and Aztec. Those were the cases. Those were the crash retrievals that gave them the greatest boost in their program of reverse engineering the UFO file. That's where Kona comes from. It's not the Hawaiian Observatory or whatever. So keep that all in mind. And there's a reason we've been able to supply that to you, because we've been on a research track that opens up these kind of doors. Now, the question is, where are they taking this now? And the Golden Dome test being set for the election of 2028 is a stunning factor involved here. The price tag is stunning, $300 billion. The move to become a vested shareholder and then basically take over Lockheed Martin on the Trump side is phenomenal. Now, I'm going to put a couple of interesting Easter eggs in here that we can crisscross later, but just keep these in mind. Let it form a little background reference point in this episode here, so that on this, what is the date? August 29th? Mm-hmm. On this Friday, August 29th, 2025, we can remember some of these things and then see how they play out as we come up here in the future. Okay, SpaceX is now running the U.S. military's secret Milnet satellite network. Milnet, M-I-L-N-E-T. I want you to take special note of Milnet now, because it's going to become important later. And it's one of the things that Musk tried to bully Trump with, believe it or not. And that didn't go very, very well. Of course, Musk played a kind of Sinatra-ish role in getting Trump into the presidency the way that Sinatra did for JFK in 1960. And then afterwards, Sinatra expected all these things. But Bobby Kennedy cut him off at the pass and was like, you know, you still have all those mob people. You're crawling with the mob. You know, my brother's not staying at your house, and we're not getting involved. And Sinatra flipped out dramatically over this, and even destroyed this little airport he set up at his house for Kennedy to come in and land. The same thing happened with Musk, interestingly enough, because there is a weird crossover there with what Sinatra was trying to do in terms of influence with Kennedy and what Musk was trying to do with Trump. And, you know, Musk's flip out, so interesting and so over the top, and like trying to tie Trump into the Epstein files and all of these things, anything that he could to take Trump down after promoting him and all the rest of it. And it was all over the fact that Musk wanted his guy in at NASA. But the problem with that guy is his whole history was around Democrats, and Trump said, no way. And Musk hit the ceiling. And this piece about Milnet became a football here of influence of what was going on. Milnet Satcom network, as it seems to be a governmental secret. However, we know that once complete, this will be part of the U.S. hybrid mesh network, which will consist of commercial and Defense Department satellites. Other details in the satellite network were provided by Jeff Weisler, a Delta 8 commander. He says, quote, Milnet is onboarding to the United States Space Force through Space System Command right now, specifically the Delta 8. We are completely relooking at how we're going to operate that constellation of capabilities for the joint force, which is going to be significant because we've never had a DoD hybrid mesh network at low Earth orbit. It's a gigantic change in the command structure and how those commands go out, how mistakes are made, how errors are compensated for. It is part of this whole Star Shield rollout. Now, what I want to say is this. Lockheed had their whole space deterrent. And this is the thing that came up in 2024. And I call it the space takeover because their whole piece was about how from space, their satellites could control everything on the ground. Of course, we have a lot of that going on as it is, but their infrastructure was that much more, the surveillance aspect of that infrastructure was beyond anything we had ever seen and was utilizing these advanced technologies. What was going on, very interestingly, during the drone swarms of December of 2024, completely unexplained. As a matter of fact, they got so much pressure on this at the Defense Department that they've announced a little, we're going to look into that. But this is a gigantic test. And in the middle of that test, while you're testing and not telling the public, somebody else piggybacked in there. And this is why you had President Trump as president-elect with all of those shoot down the drones defenses on his, caravan as he was going along these presidential motorcades. And also the fact that he would not go to Bedminster during that whole thing because they were appearing in New Jersey after all. Oddly enough, our friend Steven Spielberg was shooting his UFO movie in New Jersey at the same time. We try to put all those together in some grand pattern. And as I've pointed out, the independent media really fell down on this, unfortunately. And they were like, oh, people are just imagining things, they're seeing helicopters and thinking that they're drones, whatever. No, people see planes and helicopters all the time. They can tell the difference. This was a drone swarm, and it was throughout the United States, specifically in the Northeast. Now, during that period of time, the person who was running Homeland Synchronizer was who? General Geo, Northcom's COG commander, who's also the head of NORAD. And the setup for the operations that he was running was UAP versus UAS. Those were the tests. So all that feedback that they got from people being freaked out and saying, hey, there's this thing sitting in my house that's a drone, that's an incredible sweep of information that they got, just like with the Chinese balloon a year earlier. Tremendous information where the Northcom commander then, the guy who was originally the 509th commander, Van Herk, he came out and said, oh yeah, we don't know, this could be extraterrestrial. And all the newspapers and everything, the websites, everywhere. Mainstream media picked that up. Biggest thing. NORAD commander says it could be ET. And then the New York Times headline, they shot down UFO. They did all this. I have it completely well documented. So what were they trying to do? Because, of course, they were not UFOs invading. They were trying to get the detailed feedback of how people would respond to a sky event, a threat, where they could usher in these emergency powers. They wanted to test the believability of that swarm and the reactions and the panic level. So they have tremendous pools of data mining from that one piece. Keep that in mind as we move forward in this. And then Lockheed is going to become oh so important, which is why President Trump is aiming his sights on taking it over through buying friendly shares. After all, they're basically part of the government anyway. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X-203 Space Cage. This is what Lockheed is developing. It's the UFO file Lockheed Takeover. And the Nebra mystery is even more mysterious about this event that they perceive coming in astronomically that is going to really shake up the system here on Earth, and they're trying to prepare themselves for it. We're going to be taking your questions here really shortly, like in about 5 minutes, I promise. And before I go any further, what do you got?
David Termina says, hard to avoid the fact that if the taxpayers footed the bill for the X technology, then technically we own it already, or should.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Absolutely. The fact that, I mean, it is taxation without representation on that, basically. But I would also say that, you know, that should be part of the conversation as well, because, things like NASA and all the rest of it are under public budgets, public control, and all the rest of it. So this has come through that black budget, which is definitely um, coming right out of our pockets. Okay. I have a couple of things. I want to remind everyone about some interesting things from the original contactee groups out of the early reports of the UFO file and how they were related to Lockheed Martin, and also about secret technology that went missing. And I don't know if they ever recovered it. But my guess is that through some of the trails that we've had on this show about people like Brother Sunburst and the head of that cult and all the rest of it, and the brother of Brian De Palma, Bruce De Palma,
Wow.
that piece of the hidden technology and the Melchizedek device and how that relates to Tesla, there's a lot here beneath the surface. What I want to do though is, when we keep in mind that era, what they were trying to do with Adamski and others, and of course, Adamski was very well versed in the public mystery school of theosophy, gave his own lectures on Atlantis and everything else. And here he was suddenly, he was a very early adopter of filming UFOs pictures and had some of the best early pictures. Then suddenly, 1952, Orthon shows up with his Nordic looks and everything else and says, we need to save humanity from its nuclear self. And it's a very interesting story because it sets a pattern, dramatic pattern, all the way through Billy Meyer and others, about these groups coming in that are basically scientific groups with some kind of spiritual message. And they are, here almost in like a shuttlecraft observing what's going on here. There are so many stories about this, and some of them might seem extraordinary, about these groups that are supposedly Nordic or Pleiadians or whatever it would happen to be, trying to save us from destroying ourselves. The only thing that I think is extraordinary about this is there are all these rumors about Eisenhower meeting with these ETs in 1955. And you might blow those stories off and say, whatever, there's always rumors and things. But as diligent a researcher as Stanton Friedman, and he was diligent in my many conversations with him, I learned that, and of course from his books and the great interviews that we did with him on this show, he told me there was a tremendous, tremendous paper trail of witnesses and other things about this meeting that took place. And that it was Eisenhower who said he was going off to a dental appointment, but no, in fact, he used the time to show up at this Air Force base in California, and he had this meeting with a craft that came down. In the subsequent years following, there were a number of things that would take place at these different Air Force bases about ships showing up. And were those cover stories in order that the other one would always look a little bit unusual? Hard to say, but that original idea of communication, I think, is fascinating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a possibility about what took place in a situation like that, relying on the fact that we had very early contact. And I'm going to do it through someone who was a trance channel, who was a Canadian, who made some extraordinary predictions that did come to pass about these sightings over New York City, which I first heard about through a NORAD office all the way back in 2010. But I got to spend some time, and I recorded over 18 hours with Rick Thurston. who was doing a Casey style trance. I'm going to read a couple of things from Thurston about this to give us some idea and some consideration for what might be going on here. Then we'll go into your questions, and then I'll just roll the rest of the quotes in along with the rest of the space Star Wars piece in. Miss Olivia, before I do that, what do you got?
Give me 1 second. Well, I'm going to start here. Stephen K says, can DJ throw a bone to those of us who are clueless about the mystery schools and give us a good starting point for reading?
Well, the starting point that I would suggest would be any episode that we've done here on the Eighth Sphere, Ahriman and Rudolf Steiner. That'll give you, we have a number of them. I mean, the X series, we have 203 episodes, but in fact, there's over 280 episodes because we have supplementary episodes. Any one of those episodes dealing with the mystery schools will give you the real background. And certainly In Search of the Miraculous, which is the story of Gurdjieff, written by his chief pupil, Ouspensky, who was a fantastic writer, thinker, esotericist himself, who broke with Gurdjieff later. But that will give you some idea of the fundamental nature of the mystery schools. However, you've got mystery schools on the public side like anthroposophy, like theosophy, and they really are working on the spiritual angle of the spiritual science and the higher mind bit. Then you have others that are about practice, very much like the Fourth Way, which is getting you to get out of your mechanical routine and giving you a number of techniques. There's almost like some NLP and things like that in the Gurdjieff work, but it is a tremendous revelation in its period. And all of the work, all of the Casey work, which really stems from the fact that the forces that were around him, although it's not like he was going to, meetings with mystery schools, but the groups that were guiding him on a kind of astral basis were, Rosicrucian and others. So the so-called Great White Brotherhood, and I'll tell you, the stories, whenever you get around that, it is this incredible idea that there are these ascended masters that are working and they are moving the culture forward under very difficult circumstances. So there's so much information there that would take half of a lifetime just to study it. So I've tried to condense it down and really highlight the most important moments. That's all in the X series. And I think that there's an episode called Steiner versus Ahriman, and I think it's episode 14, which would be a good one to start. What do you think? I think Ahriman is a good way in.
Yes, and isn't there a Casey on the Great White Brotherhood also?
No,
there isn't.
A book? No,
Yeah.
no. There's Edgar Casey on Jesus, which is a fascinating book by a one-time author named Jeffrey First. And the great thing about it is it uses a great deal of the readings. And it talks all about the Essene mystery schools, which Casey brought into focus, said they had female members, and everyone was like, what is he talking about? There's no Essene group, and there were never any female members around these Jewish groups that were part of the structure of the group. And then in 1947, 2 years after Casey dies, they find the Dead Sea Scrolls. As they're interpreting them, there are female members, one. Also, they study all of this very mystical kind of stuff. And guess what? Yeah, the Essenes existed as that desert community. And they were studying, according to Casey, numerology, astrology, astral projection, And he talks all about this great instructor named Judy that Christ had. And when they asked, was she present at the crucifixion? He said, well, she wasn't physically there, but she projected herself astrally to watch the whole thing. So the Essenes were already operating on this incredible level. I'll tell you what's weird. And this might not have an answer, but Gurdjieff, when he's doing his meetings with remarkable men, which is all about his own discovery of the Sarmoon Mystery School Brotherhood, And Gurdjieff had all kinds of mystery school techniques. It was undeniable that he was part of these schools. And his own personality may have been kind of a stumbling block in how he got his message out. But the fact that he was part of the schools at one point is undeniable. He talks about discovering the Essene school and working with them. Well, there's something very strange there, because Essene means expectancy, according to Casey. The whole thing was set up through the School of the Prophets to create a channel for the Messiah, Christ, to come through. So the Essenes, that version of the Essenes went away. So what was it Gurdjieff was talking about? How was he participating in a group that was 2,000 years gone? Think about that as we get into this next section, X Series 203, the Space Cage UFO file, Lockheed Takeover, and the Niebuhr mystery, which I can tell we're going to have to go deeper on in another episode on the Niebuhr part, because there's so much material here. But with all that, we'll roll your questions in. Miss Olivia, you've got the floor. It's up to you.
Okay.
It's all on
right.
you.
Oh, God. It's so rich already. Okay, so David Donaway, is there any indication that ETs are helping humanity evade a space cage, or are they backing a space cage? Or are they disinterested? Is it about planetary usury perfected? Also, if the mystery schools are competing, do they have different factions of ETs on both the left and right-hand paths?
Well, it's interesting because when you look at the schools and the amount of kind of trance channeling, take like the Vril Society, for example, they had the impression they were working with an ET group. So there's a possibility there, but you're talking about realms of spiritual communication. There is no question that contact has happened. In Emma Britton's, who was one of the founders of Theosophy and one of the greatest psychics, it's interesting because it was Blavatsky herself who later, would kind of have issues with Britton, because Blavatsky was coming so much from the Eastern side of things. She was being pushed in that direction. And according to Casey Steiner, actually, she had some distortion about Christianity in her own past, because maybe she'd been burned at the stake the way that Annie Besant was in a previous incarnation. So they had this Christianity thing, they had certain blocks around how the Western tradition was taking over, and the Eastern tradition had set up the Western tradition. But I think it's important to note that there could be this idea that when you're dealing with that type of contact, you are talking about channeling, you're talking about, looking to contact like Saint Germain or the Great White Brotherhood and these different things. That is a whole mystical process that someone needs to be prepared for. And they go through a series of different purifications and things to be able to do that. Some people just have the natural talent for it. So the idea that you would need an ET or something in that piece is completely incorrect, but it doesn't mean you wouldn't encounter one. I remember a very interesting conversation I had with Graham Hancock when we had him up here, and we were in this fantastic church close by here, and we filmed the whole thing. And but as we were talking, we've had a number of good conversations and interviews with Graham, who does excellent work. And he told me, of course, about his many ayahuasca trips. And there was a whole thing about him doing a workshop in Costa Rica about it. But he told me about one of his experiences when he was in that state, and how he saw a gray while he was in the state of, this ayahuasca, reverie. And I think that's interesting. And I think it shows that these things pop in from different levels, and that it's not just, hey, they came over from Alpha Centauri and here they are. Now, it's very interesting to note that the person that I mentioned, Rick Thurston, I'm going to read the quote from, I didn't forget. Thurston said that the grays were from the Boaties. So that's one interpretation of where they could be coming from. That's an off-world place for sure. So is there some kind of mix going on here? We could look at them that way, or we can, if you're in an experience like Graham Hancock, you're in this kind of spiritual interface and you encounter a number of different astral beings, the grays are one of them. But for some reason, the grays apparently come in from the astral plane and are able to manifest physically. That's where it gets deep, and it's not as simple as, hey, there's some great civilization that grew up on a planet over here. Now, I do also place a lot of emphasis on the fact that Gordon Cooper, who had been in space and had been close to this program, that when he saw UFOs, his instant thought was, that's advanced technology from another planet. Because he could match the maneuvers and things that they were doing and realize, whoever it is, it's far advanced from anything we have, therefore it's not human technology. So there are the gradations of understandings when we get around these things. We just need to allow for that. There's no way you're going to get a complete answer on those in one lifetime. I highly doubt it. Here's the quote about the Boaties from the Transcenders, who I think were working, from the time that I worked with them, they were working on a Casey type level. What's also interesting, and I will say this, which is when you were around the Transcenders, when Rick went into that trance, your whole body felt it, whatever was going on there. So it was not, somebody doing an acting routine. You energetically felt the whole thing shift. Okay, just a quick quote. Okay, they're extremely important reason for the collapse of the so-called conspiracy of silence. Okay, I'm going to try to get exactly the quote here. Okay, yeah. The great potential advancement for commercial airliners in context of total passengers and no environmental pollution. This is what it provides, but it is still into the future because you still have a great deal of influence by oil companies and other commercial interests. What they're talking about here is what would happen if we had that UFO technology to revolutionize the culture. And remember, this is about 2010. You stated that there was a prototype of that revolutionary new aircraft that actually did fly. And the answer is yes, but that was a much smaller unmanned model of such. But there are problems with the larger models in terms of impact of heating on the metals. Now, the United States does have the metal and the technology that will resolve these technical problems. But then, as we pointed out, there are a lot of outside interests to reckon with. And the question asked, the Skunk Works, an association of several aircraft companies, Lockheed Martin, are working on a radical new power unit. Are they similar to these UFOs? No. It doesn't work in an Earth reality, and unfortunately, you don't have terminology to describe a reality that is basically alien. The closest we can come to explaining it is that in your science fiction, you have the antimatter concept. It's like a controlled nuclear explosion, and it is the explosion of molecules that creates a very strong propellant. It doesn't have an exhaust or anything like that. It's totally clean. Concepts for such were extrapolated from captured alien spacecraft by our own government. However, different alien spacecraft have different methods of power and control. You mentioned the UFO cabal attempted to fly a Boaties, that is the Greys, spacecraft as far back as 1965, but it crashed near Kecksburg in Pennsylvania because, as you pointed out, the problem was that it was out of control. Now, here's how the Transcenders answered this. Indeed, you must remember this is not human technology. It is an integrated technology with the Boaties system. Think of it as the electrical impulses of your body being used to control parts of the vehicle. But essentially, the Americans and the Russians we'll learn these controls in the future. There's a lot about how we captured technology, tried to master it over the course of a few decades, and weren't able to. And then one of the things that I've devised around all this is this idea of apotheum, which is if you study those UFO cases, you get into a complete physical distortion, a physics distortion, a reality distortion physics. And that's where the missing time comes from. And when you're dealing with that, it's very hard to apply this new technology, and it's very hard to aim it also in some way that, everything has a kind of a weapons application with these people. And so when they're thinking of it that way, if they're thinking of aiming it, this thing could boomerang or whatever. And if it does that, you've completely imploded reality, as it were. One of the things that we've said in different interviews and things is that the torsion physics make the atomic bomb look like a firecracker. Yes.
Well, even with like Neuralink, you can have somebody who is paralyzed think things and move things with their
Yes.
mind
Oh, yeah.
and type out their
Yes.
thoughts and everything. So, I mean, we're getting there.
Yeah. That's the exciting cover too, because
Mhm.
Neuralink, they want to do much more pernicious things with it. But yes, that great promise sits right in there. Yeah.
Okay, so Plot 57, can you say more about the ETs changing their strategy in the SDI era?
I think it's interesting. I noticed somebody asked about Bootes. The spelling is Bootes, and it is, one of these star systems. And Thurston is identifying that as the Gray's home, as it were. We know that in the Betty and Barney Hill story, Zeta Reticuli is what's identified there. But is that cover? Could very well
Well,
be.
and also, Junior doesn't look like a gray, not a typical gray.
Excellent point.
Mhm.
No, it's quite interesting. And also, when they showed Betty Hill pictures of Grace and stuff, she's like, "Oh, that didn't look anything like what I saw. What I saw were people. They were people. I mean, they do look different. There's no question about it." So I'm sorry, what was the question?
SDI?
Oh yeah, SDI. Look, that period, if you clock it, it's March 1983 when Reagan makes this rather dramatic speech. It's so powerful where he's coming from that what Reagan is doing is he's saying, I'm calling on all the scientists to develop this shield for the United States. And by the way, if it freaks out, our adversary, we'll share the technology with them, but we need the ability to get rid of the nuclear menace. And Reagan was very, very clear about this. He felt that nuclear weapons were the complete piece of Armageddon. And he felt that they would eventually run into that. And they had a movie there in that period called The Day After. So if you go back and watch as a TV movie, it's all about what happens in the devastation of a nuclear war. This is the era where they were talking about these things. And SDI Star Wars comes in as this idea of what he would call shield. And it's a missile defense system that can shoot these things from space. Now, what we have from Corso is very important because he's saying, oh, yeah, did they want to block intercontinental ballistic missiles? Yeah, but what they wanted was a show of force against these things that were dominating our sensors. And I think they presented it to Reagan as a threat. Now, something advanced in your space doesn't represent a threat necessarily. This is the nature of the problem with the whole UFO threat piece. Because if something hasn't demonstrated hostile intentions and it's superior, what they do is they regard it a threat as a default. But they've been running around after it for 100 years. And the only thing that they've proved to themselves is that the stuff is incredibly superior and it doesn't seem to have that whole menacing war thing. And if it did, of course, we would be toast by now. But this is, again, we're projecting a very human war thing on this other stuff coming in from somewhere else, right? So this is the nature of part of the problem. But what's the brilliance of the Strategic Defense Initiative was it's bringing the Russians in. This is the same thing that Kennedy wanted to do. He said, prepare, November 12th, he told his CIA director, prepare all the high threat cases related to this, because I don't want them thinking that one of these UFOs going over one of their nuclear bases is us flying a U-2 or something. That'll set off World War III. I want those cases and I want to share them. And also, there's a whole sharing initiative. It's called Cooperation with the Soviet Union in Outer Space. It's sitting at the Kennedy Library. You can't miss it. And it's all about how they're going to share technology and share the space program. It's on record from Sergei Khrushchev that Kennedy was saying, "It's not going to be any moon race. We're going to do it together. There's no space race. There's no arms race." So that's a whole different paradigm. And to lose those profits, to lose the realization of this, great space war on the deep state side, and also to lose the fulfillment of things like Vietnam or invading Cuba and all the rest of it. How much were they looking at Kennedy and thinking, hey, we've spent the last, 20 years at least, longer, setting up the world. Since World War II, we figured out this whole program, and this guy's coming in with a peace initiative, and also the group that's inside really pushing that advanced technology part. They're paperclip Germans who have just killed 30 million Russians. They don't want anything to do with sharing that technology. And I want to point this out too, because people kind of get on America for being Nazis because we took the paperclip scientists in. Look, Russia took paperclip scientists, and anybody who had access to those scientists did, because they were the most advanced scientists. So they had their share, we had our share. I think we had a better share, but let's get real about it. The problem is that instead of reforming them into good Americans, their martial philosophy spread into our own government sources. And that's where you have, between the Central Intelligence Agency and the advanced technology, this connection to this worldwide power center. This is the nature of the problem. That's where X-Protect comes in, because when you have that advanced technology and you have those pieces working together, then you're up against a very formidable enemy. So you might have people in the regular government who are just politicians, and then there's this force in the middle of it. And a lot of that force also consisted of incredibly powerful oil people, for example. So, we need to understand what that means, but there's no question that the paperclip scientists, they were responsible for the Russian space programming being so advanced, and they were responsible for our program being so advanced. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Woo! X Series 203, the Space Cage, UFO File, Lockheed Takeover. Lockheed has a program to take over space as a defense contractor. And President Trump wants to buy in and just bring all of that back under the executive branch. And the thinking on it by Secretary Lutnick, and I'll read his quote, is, they're already part of the government, so we might as well own them full out. But there's a lot of implications with Trump doing that fold right into this Golden Dome aspect, and things that will test systems like this, like 3i Atlas and all the rest. The UFO threat people are trying to get ahead of those moves by creating the sky event emergency before all that happens. That's what so much of this commotion is about around the UFO file in Congress. That's what we're putting forward here tonight. And that's why you see some of those threatsters like Gary Nolan being rolled out, because some of the other guys have failed. And they're trying to roll out this whole Nolan piece again. But again, it takes us, it takes a lone outpost first, then with the ideas room, to ricochet out that Nolan Fauci connection. I tell you, it is rippling. It's rippling hardcore right now, today, because of what we're putting out here. So if we get that clear, if people get that message clear, and then they realize, oh, Nolan works for the CIA, then a lot of the stuff that the podcast pop clickers, who apparently haven't studied the subject very well, are promoting with the Nolan garbage, then that stuff goes out the window because they start to see, oh, it's the CIA program and he's a Fauci guy. That's a lot different than UFO transparency that I was looking for. That's the realization that we need to bring through. That's how you smash the op. And I'll tell you, that's how you smash the Mellon op as well, because Mellon is a big financier and manipulator of that whole narrative. And he has navigated those people away from my program. Think about that. So he knows that we know. And with the help of his cousin, John Warner, we know a lot about the UFO threat. And I do want to say this about John Warner. A lot of people have asked me about him. And of course, we've done over a half dozen interviews. He's really put a lot on the record. But I think he got hassled very heavily by that system on the defense side and also on the Mellon side. And of course, his mom is the heir to the Mellon, heiress to the Mellon fortune. So I think eventually we'll hear more from him, but I can tell you that behind the scenes, he's talking to people and saying, they're feeding us the same junk about the UFO threat. We need to move forward from this. And he's basically saying, I'm laying low right now, but he's going to come back. Yes.
Okay, back to SDI. So SB Harkin says it brought Israel in, including Avi Lobe's work for SDI while he was in the IDF on the physics of accelerating objects in space.
Yes.
David
I pointed that out in the episode we did on Avi Lobe, that he, at the age of 21, was working on SDI. So we brought him over through Talpiot, where he's a member for a decade with Talpiot. I guess you never leave. It's like the CIA. But that's Israeli military intelligence. So that's who Lobe, for better or worse, however you want to make of that. But it's very clear that it's important, if somebody's talking about an event like this, to understand where his allegiances are. If it's to the intelligence community through Israel, then, you're going to look at it a lot differently than you would some random scientist, right? That's just reasonable. And I want to point this out too, because, you get the impression sometimes with people who get sucked into the op, and they think that, you're taking down my hero or whatever. Look, investigative journalism is adversarial by nature. It has to be. If you're investigating, a company that is dumping nuclear waste into a river, you're not going to hang out with the CEO of that company, right? You're going to investigate him, and that's going to be adversarial. But it can't ever be personal. That's what you learn. And of course, if it were personal, then that's the end of any kind of objective reporting. So adversarial reporting is investigative journalism. Get with it. It has to be. And like I said, there's nothing personal about it. You're just getting to the facts. And the facts in this case is that there's a DOD billionaire in this mix. There's Peter Thiel in this UFO mix right here in our independent media around the UFO file. And there are, all of these CIA disinformation people. That's a fact. It's a documented fact. We've put it on the record over the course of 5 or 6 years here. It's undeniable,
Actually, who were you alluding to about this independent?
Well, Thiel, Thiel.
Well, I know, but this is the point, is that it's not independent.
Yes.
When you have somebody with that much power and influence,
oh, forget
who
it.
is
Yeah,
propping you up,
exactly
right? Who is funding you, who is setting you up with cameras and sets and the whole damn thing.
Right.
That is not independent media. Can we get real?
No, there's a whole, there's a big realization that needs to come in here, which is nobody has any idea how much money is behind this podcast scene. And the podcast scene, I know all of the people, through various connections of my own who deal in marketing, advertising, and all these other things. Some of the investments from the venture companies, when they talk about launching a podcast, get into the range of like 80, 90, $100 million. That's the kind of money that they're talking about. It has nothing to do with independent media, And I use the example of the Fox News personalities coming in and doing it, but it's really, there's all kinds of them, of course. MSNBC and all the rest, all those people coming in and pretending to be independent. No, they're on YouTube. Yeah. And they're on Spotify or whatever, but they're not independent.
They may not have a corporation behind them, but they've got like a billionaire behind them, right?
Yes.
And is using them to actually support their view. It's an investment, right?
It is. And I've pointed out with the Fox people, and there might be even people that do good work, like Tucker Carlson or whatever. But, Tucker Carlson, when they asked him, he has 45 people working on that show, and it's not a guy in a log cabin or whatever. I mean, it's a very sophisticated arrangement.
It looks like a log cabin.
Megyn Kelly, and some people like Megyn. But here's the thing, and she's great, I'm sure. Very nice person. But, she talks about her 6 producers for things. So these are people with big money and big production moving into this space. So there's a huge difference between that and independent journalism. The problem is, and it's not that money equals bad, but the profit-driven motive is different from a research motive. They can come together. There can be somebody who puts together a great amount of research and makes a tremendous amount of money. There's no problem with that. But the problem is the motivating force. Now, I talked about something, I've been talking about this for a while now, which is called peak metric. That's the big secret in the background when I've talked to PR people and others, which is all of those podcasters and a lot of those shows. What they're being told is, look, if you really want to kind of be the leader in this, you have to keep putting out more shows than you're putting out. If you're putting out 3 shows a week or 4 shows a week, it's not enough. And so you see a lot of them developing. I have a daytime show. Now I have a nighttime show. Now I have a true crime show, and the idea is throw it all out there because it's volume that is going to have you dominate the podcast space. Well, I understand the need to try to dominate the space that you're in, but the quality level gets more and more watered down as you go. It's inevitable. It's like any great thing, when you have a tremendous artist and you squeeze them too tight, you put them out on too many tours and all the rest of it, the quality of what they do.
You kill Elvis.
Yeah, you kill Elvis, exactly.
We know what happens.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X-Series 203, and we don't have 46 producers, but we're delivering the potent information. You got it? We will take more questions here. This is the Space Cage UFO file, Lockheed Takeover, Niebuhr Mystery, going deep, which is the important thing to do here. My job is to get you as close to the truth around these subjects as I can with my own abilities and my own knowledge and experience as an investigative journalist around these topics, which go very, very deep. So that's what we're going to continue to do, regardless of what's the explosions that are happening around the independent side or the podcast side, whatever it is. And just like when the corporate media ruled the day and now they're moving all their people into pseudo astroturfing the space. And, this is something that we're just going to have to kind of go through together. And my thing is always to be bringing you something that enhances the conversation, the ideas, and the knowledge around the subjects that we're looking at. That's what my goal is. And everything else is kind of gratis. Yes.
David Tremina, it seems highly likely that Avi Lobe would have collaborated with Heinik Eshed before, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Eshed dropped his bombshell Alien Federation statements. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, it's, there was a guy named, I did Kurt Metzger. He and I did a show together. We were having a good time with it. But, and Kurt is a great guy, by the way. He
man, is he a wild man?
I'll tell you what's great about Kurt is he has this incredibly fast wit with everything, but he studies the news and the media, and that's why he's so valuable around these things. And I found him and I found Sam Tripoli incredibly refreshing around all of these subjects, and they really do take time to shake it out. But while we were on there, he introduced me to one of his friends named Dan St. Germain, and he had some things to say about that. What was the question again? About
Heinik Eshed?
Oh yeah. Well, what I think is maybe important about Heimished and this whole thing is that he came out with his revelation. And then, you know, you have the fact that Avi Lobe had been on this guy's show. He'd been on this Saint Germain guy's show. And I said, oh, yeah, well, unfortunately, Loeb is part of this astrophysics push about how Oumuamua was AI. And now this new thing is AI. It's an alien AI. We have to communicate with it. It's a threat and all the rest of it. And he was like, it's amazing. He's a really very nice guy when I talked to him. And I was just thinking to myself, of course, there's no question. A lot of these guys are very nice guys. I'm sure Gary Nolan is a very nice guy. It is just when you are dealing with who these people are influenced by and who they work for, then we have to kind of see through them to the influences that are pushing them out there. That's just part of what you do in reporting under any circumstances. Doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make them a bad guy. But I thought that was interesting when he was saying, well, he seemed like a very nice guy. Like the idea was, since he was nice, he's not going to pull a UFO threat, But no, you can have very nice people caught up in all kinds of machinations. And I always think of David Grush, who came to me with a number of different things. And in our conversations, I got the impression he was a sincere person who had a lot on the ball and had seen a number of things. But that the problem was that the crew that was managing him, the Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo thing, and of course, classically, Chris Mellon wouldn't allow him to talk to me. I just said, you can't be you can't be yourself. You can't be a whole person if Chris Mellon is pulling your string.
How about you can't be a man?
Yeah, you can't be a man.
Let's get down to it.
Yeah, it's true. That's a good point. Well, the other problem with this, and I think that Grush was better than some in terms of, legitimately wanting to get some facts out as a whistleblower. But part of the problem is the environment. And the environment is, if you do this, that the people who are going to back you up have to be billionaire DOD Mellon, who's going to control what you do. So you're not a whistleblower anymore. You are a puppet of Chris Mellon. And I'll tell you that I was under the impression he was going to think about what he was doing. And after our conversation, he had some event with Chris Mellon, and it was reported in Wall Street Journal and all these other things because it was right in New York. It was a finance thing. And they said that in the room was over $400 billion. That is the people, the venture capitalists. So the whole thing of the Grush going out and telling his story, now Mellon is like, hey, I'm putting all these venture capital people out there to promote this guy's UFO story, and their collected wealth in that room was $400 billion. And the rest of the people were Homeland Security and CIA people. So I was like, can this even be real? I went through and detailed it, that he gave the speech there and all the rest of it. And my thing was to say, look, I'm going to come out and talk about how Chris Mellon is manipulating the situation. And Mellon himself flipped out, tried to defend himself, and went after John Warner and all that stuff. But look, the secret is out. Mellon controls the whistleblowers. He manipulates them. That's why the congressional hearings failed around the UFO file. If you want to get to the truth of these things, you have to shake out the uncomfortable truths, get rid of the mayor of Area 51 DOD billionaire who's controlling everything, get him off of the stage of disclosure, and get the real people coming through with the real thing. Is that simple enough? So we've already seen the Clapper stuff, being behind Elizondo. We've seen that Nolan is hooked up with Fauci and all these other people. I mean, how much more evidence do you need to have that these are the wrong people? It's just unquestionable. So you need a totally new approach in relation to this. And you can do it. The people in Congress can do it if they stop groveling to all the wrong people. Yes.
I just got a picture in my head. That was so clear. I know we're really off topic, but really, I think we're naive, and that there's a pro and a con both. It cuts both
Sure.
ways. So, but when you get into a room with all of that money, that power and influence,
Oh, sure.
I think it changes you, and you do. It must be very intimidating, and you feel very small. And then you think, oh, if I could just get a little piece of what they have, if I could be a pet of theirs, I think that's what
Yeah.
people settle for.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're like, I'll be a puppet, I'll be a pet, and I'll get a little piece of their world. And no matter who it is, I mean, this happens with journalists, who hang out with the elites and everything.
Oh,
And
excellent point.
but I think it's very intoxicating and humbling in a way, and I think it really changes you. Your idealism is shot because you realize what real power is, and I think it's really shocking to be around. I've only tasted a little bit of it, and it is I can tell you that it is incredibly humbling to be with, like, a movie star, to meet a movie star in person.
Oh, yeah.
You'll never feel as crappy about yourself. It's like,
You've known many of them. You've known many of them.
yes, but I mean, it'll take you down, at least for a little while until you get your grounding again.
Excellent point. No, it's a fantastic point. And one thing I will say is it's misplaced. This is the problem, because something as important to humanity as the origin story of UFOs, and if they're alone in the universe, the big stories around the mystery schools and your spiritual development, these things, they don't lend themselves. I mean, just like the guru thing was a complete kind of whoring out of people's spirituality that had nothing to do with the deeper understanding of, like, Buddhist philosophy or something like that. So we need to understand what that is, and that these topics don't lend themselves to that kind of exploitation, which is why it's so garish. And that was one of the things that I was really shocked by in the middle of all that, was all those people. And here's another interesting thing about Nolan, that they have these SALT conferences. If you're a financier, you're very familiar with this stuff. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being a good financier and making a lot of money and all the rest of it. It's not that. Again, it is the movement of that influence for unproductive and coercive purposes, right? But what happened was, he went forward, and I have the recording of this, so there's no question about it for the Nolan fans in the audience. But he said, yeah, we used the UFO threat, in order to get attention on the subject so we could get these investment conferences going. That's how they think. People need to be made afraid in order to get moving on this thing. So he was willing to lie, which is very highly unethical, in order to get investment going around his UFO project. And he's openly saying that in the middle of the SALT conference. And I'm like, there it is. We put it on the record that this is what they're doing, and now they're just admitting it in the open. So that's the thing. That's the stuff that needs to get acknowledged. That field is so in shambles with manipulation that you have to come out of it like a phoenix from the ashes. And if you're going to get to any real truth around the UFO file, you need a totally, totally different course. And that course can be, brought together by independent researchers. It does not require a government entity, DOD billionaires, CIA people. Matter of fact, I think the first rule should be no CIA. No CIA. And right away, your truth-telling factor is going to go up dramatically. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, Space Cage, episode 203. And important comments there about the Hollywood effect, as it were. And all those people, look, we're talking about Grush. Now he is he's involved in the production. He's co-producer of the Bruckenheimer movie about UFOs coming out. So you see, it's kind of like being that whistleblower role pays, because Hollywood, you're in with Hollywood, and Elizondo's an advisor on the Spielberg movie. I mean, the intelligence agencies know how to plug in these people into their different careers. But that's not really how you get to the truth. And this is the nature of the problem with it. The UFO field, because it's such a minefield, requires such an approach that you cannot be influenced by those. That's the key. And if you can have that kind of unmolested mindset going in, then you can get a lot of advancement because there's a lot of information available out there on it. Okay. Miss Olivia, I have some quotes to read. So let's take your next question first.
Okay. So following up, so David Tumita, when Reagan made his "if there was an alien threat" speech, tensions with the Russians cooled off. Do you think that Trump is going for the same approach? And David Donaway, do we have a sense that mystery schools in Russia will come to save humanity from Ahrimanic forces that might be taking over Western civilization?
Well, there's an Ahriman problem. I think that's what Steiner was trying to tell us. And that the technology, this is one of the reasons the mystery schools came out and pushed back against the scientific materialism we were experiencing. And it is quite a battle. But suddenly, out of nowhere, you had reincarnation, psychic experience, extrasensory perception, ascended master, all this stuff was being moved forward into the culture. That comes directly out of the Mystery School Initiative saying, we're not going to recognize humanity in 100 years if we don't do something. So the technology and the drastic changes that are involved in the political structures as a result of that also represent something spiritually. There's no question about it. And the whole idea of this dark astral force that Steiner was trying to give us of Ahriman, and how the technology and the 21st century is like the big clash. It's funny, when you look at theosophy, they're saying, oh, we're moving into the next root race, we're going to be psychically evolved species, all these great things are going to happen, and it just sounds fantastic. And Steiner, he also says, well, things are going to be great, but you're going to have this incredible clash with Ahriman, and the face-off is going to determine what happens. And part of the problem is that face-off with Ahriman represents if humanity goes forward to its natural spiritual evolution. And if it doesn't, then you become a plaything in eternity for the eighth sphere and Ahrimanic forces. And, that whole vision of the new Jupiter, New Jerusalem, that whole thing that he talks about in anthroposophy never comes to pass. So the stakes are very high. You can see that this is the same thing that's going on in the religious teachings. When you get around the New Testament, when you get around these different spiritual works over time, they're suggesting that humanity has to stand up against these forces. And it's a dual battle because you're also battling with yourself. Remember, the whole concept of Steiner was the thing that was being built up was the war of all against all. Well, we're seeing so many of those divisions, right? So the philosophy, the esoteric psycho-spiritual connection to all this has to be a part of the conversation. I don't think you can leave it. And, I just think it's interesting that we're in such a point of this stuff breaking the dam on the UFO side that you have congressional hearings about it, and you have this almost desperate attempt, cloddish at times, by the Central Intelligence Agency and the IC in general, really, of kind of warping this whole thing, and whistleblowers. So trying to get the truth in the middle of all that is going to require very deliberate journalism that goes further than what you would traditionally see, and also is outside of those influences, which is very hard and you don't see very much of. So, but we need more of that. And that's the potent. When I stress the potency, that's what I'm talking about here. Okay, Miss Olivia.
Okay, I'm going to bundle a bunch here. General Meow Meow, has DJ covered that this also potentially becomes a space cage because we may just as well trash up space around the Earth, leaving becomes incredibly difficult. Good point. McHatton, interesting how Casey, I think it was, said a day of web of spiders would cover the sky, and web crawlers are a programming tool for collecting data.
That's Steiner's prediction.
Okay.
It is. Yes.
Happy Hermit 3D response, webs are made to entrap as well as to connect. David Donaway, Palantir and Serco helped run the British National Health System contact tracing system during COVID, providing an excuse for working on the space cage. And $300 billion for Golden Dome will need some of Larry Ellison and Oracle's $500 billion energy network with AI to process the data.
Oh,
Can you
yeah. I
connect
mean,
those
they
dots?
are. This is the problem, is they're so far ahead of us on this. You know, they're 50 years, 60 years ahead of us. How are we going to catch up if we are entertaining this BS, right? So we need the real stuff. And I think I don't feel like it's a good time to kind of procrastinate on that. I think we can bring about a good outcome, but we can't have, you know, another Q style manipulation data mining thing. You know, we can't have another drone swarm manipulation or another 7 years of intel manipulation of the UFO file with false whistleblowers and all that. We don't have that luxury, I don't believe. So I think that the conversation needs to happen now. That's I mean the best way to put it forward. It's funny, when people are talking about that webs and things, you know, I've spent a lot of time on that end of things reading about what Steiner was referring to. And what he says literally, and this could be certainly about AI, but he says in the 21st century, we'll have to coexist in a web with these other creatures that are parasitic. And if that is one outcome, if we don't wake up to this. So they're going to create, look, this is part of the problem, and this is also a throwback to the Casey readings around the things and the automatons in Atlantis, which is they're already rolling. Look, in China, they have the artificial womb, right? The robot womb and all these things. They're probably already doing cloning on a large scale behind our back, you know, and that's probably what all this harvesting of human tissue has been all about. So we kind of, this is an interface point that where we need to catch these forces before they just create that control system, and you know that they're already over that edge. And once you start integrating human organs and things with these humanoid robots, then you know that's a serious ethical waterfall you've just gone over, and that changes the entire setup of society. And they'll try to get people to go along with it and say you'll live longer or whatever, but they're going to create this whole other thing. And so when I hear Steiner saying, well, you're going to have to coexist, you know, in this web with these parasitic style creatures, I'm thinking of the automatons of the Casey period, and saying that those Atlantean scientists had manipulated DNA. And what had they used? They had basically created their own androids, and they had mixed human and animal parts. And then they made those people their slaves, and they would have them, you know, build their towers and all the rest of it, and run the Two Eyes Stone and all the rest. But they had completely deserted the spiritual aspirations of those beings, and those beings had no ability to develop spiritually at all. So it's a great crime against humanity. And if you think about it, if you really take that Casey story to its ultimate logic, we're in that cycle. We've come back again. We're kind of the Atlanteans facing ourselves off again. And so there's that moment in the mirror, and here we are. So that's something worth considering. And I certainly think some of the things we're talking about tonight with the UFO file also play into that, especially the fact that in terms of who's operating that, there already seems to be a kind of transhumanist android aspect happening. So there's a lot to consider. And, you know, we're touching on some of that tonight. Miss Olivia, before you go any further, I'm
Mhm.
going to read Jim Keith. There's a wonderful book, little book called Saucers of the Illuminati, which you can't get a much better title than that. Keith is a hero, and he died unexpectedly young. And he was the writing partner of Ken Thomas, who I had a good, uh, excellent rapport with. And Ken, unfortunately, passed away recently. Wrote a wonderful book um, called UFOs in Maury Island. And but this is Jim Keith's book, and he had something very interesting to say that correlated a lot with the whole Liberty Lobby thing that I was getting at the other night, and I'll show how this makes sense here. Uh, Quote, I'm reminded of an odd instance when a journalist friend of mine was covering a survivalist patriot convention for an American magazine. During the course of the convention, he met Bo Gritz, the right-wing Liberty Lobby's Populist Party candidate for president in the U.S. in 1992. Now, remember, Liberty Lobby had put forward General Walker of the JFK case. And they created the phony thing that Oswald had shot at General Walker and all that in order to indict Oswald in the public mind, but they had zero evidence for it. But General Walker was a very important character as this kind of right-wing general, and there were a lot of forces that wanted to see him kind of seize the United States. But Liberty Lobby was a central core in all this, and there were a lot of these Chickshinny Knights that were involved here, and put forward some information from Peter Dale Scott about them on one side, on their deep state side, and then for John Warner, that there's some Christopher Mellon connection in with that Chickshinny Knight. So we have the UFO file, and we have the deep state operating here. But here's the quote. During the course of the convention, he met Bo Gritz, the right-wing Liberty Lobby Populist Party candidate for president in the U.S. 1992, Vietnam War hero, and a prominent personality in the Patriot movement. Shaking Gritz's hand, he says that he was rather surprised that he was given what he took to be a secret Masonic grip, and that Gritz looked at him in a somewhat sheepish fashion when he didn't return the grip. An interesting confluence of forces in play in the world these days. That whole book is interesting, and I could quote from it all night, but what grabbed me there was, again, here we have Liberty Lobby, and there's a Masonic esoteric piece. Remember, of course, Corso himself is involved, and he's one of the Chickshinny Knights. And Chickshinny is this kind of wonderful hamlet in Pennsylvania where these people would meet. And these groups, I think, are very important for us to understand, because we need to understand the deeper esoteric piece into the political interplay. And we're going to find that it shows up in the deepest aspect around deep events in our own history, the JFK assassination, 9/11, and others. They have this esoteric underpinning. There's a manipulation there that goes a lot deeper than a geopolitical one, although that's the most obvious. Yes.
David Allen, are we witnessing the clash of civilization space cages to see who will get to build the new Tower of Babel?
Oh, yes. There is a clash. The clash right now is over two things, in my opinion: the UFO file and AI. That's where I think the biggest clash is. Of course, that central control, surveillance, digital money system is a big part of the consideration as well. But somehow I think the door is open on the AI part, and also on the control of the UFO file, because I think some of the moves on the Trump side is trying to say, well, we want that under executive control. He tried it in the first term with the space fence. I don't think that Trump has control of the UFO file. I think that he wants it, and he knows about it through his uncle, John Trump. think I have a quote here about John. Find this real quickly. Oh, here's an excellent shot of John. Machine which develops 1.25 million volts. Dr. John C. Trump, designer of the generator of the Dr. Robert Van de Graaff, with Dr. Van de Graaff, is shown beside the machine. Generator operates under air pressure in a sealed tank, which has been removed from the picture. 1939. John Trump was deep in the program at that point. And by the time he sent in to get Tesla's paper and observe his work, there's a great thing that goes on there. And we have an episode coming up all about it, which is all about the safe that the material was in, that because there's two places, there's two locales for the secret Tesla papers. One of them is the actual hotel. The other one is a warehouse. So the warehouse they go to first, here are the boxes and all the rest of it. But then the safe in the apartment, that's a different location. And apparently somebody beat Trump to it. That's what but that's something we have coming up in an episode called Surreptitious Entry. Look for that in September, coming up quite soon here. Okay, the U.S. government has taken a stake in Intel. The defense industry contractors could be next. Cabinet officials promise more moves as critics point to debt and pressure potential. And there you have Howard Lutnick spotlight right there. This is a shot of the vision of space dominance that Lockheed Martin put out. So this is space dominance. It's complete cosmic control of everything below on Earth from above. That is the original goal of the Nazi space program, which was complete control of everything on the ground from above. And in fact, they were the ones who dreamed up the whole idea about a space station. So, we have to be very careful when we're looking at these things. I had a bunch of articles here, but I basically delivered the thrust of this already. The only thing I want to point out again so that we understand it is that the first test of this $300 billion Golden Dome Star Wars II missile defense system, which is actually a UFO defense grid, has its first test during the election week of 2028. Let's make no mistake about it. Lockheed Martin targets 2028 demo of space-based missile interceptor. That's it. And when I drill down to the date, it's the actual week of the election. So somebody scheduled that date on purpose, in my opinion. And they might be thinking that could be a very uncertain week for certain powers that are in control. Space Force is contracting with SpaceX for new secretive Milnet SATCOM network. Pretty much touched on that, but remember Milnet SATCOM because it's going to become very important here in the next couple of months. One more description, though, I think that is worth thinking about. America's Golden Dome, Donald Trump's futuristic U.S. military air defense system that could detect and destroy incoming aerial threats. This is exactly what Reagan promised. As a matter of fact, it's so close to it that it is Trump himself who said Reagan wanted to do this, but we can do it better because now we have the technology. Well, they had the technology then. They certainly have it better now. But they're designing it in this fashion, saying, hey, we can take everything out from space. What they're not showing you there is the UFO defense grid factor, which is all of that stuff can be used also against UFOs. And this is the shadow purpose for the entire thing. They're looking at this stuff. It's 40 years later. They haven't figured out exactly what they're dealing with on a complete level, and they're deciding we're putting up a UFO defense grid against it. That's kind of the eye opener. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Cece, they need actual gold for a lot of this tech. Is there any gold in Fort Knox?
Isn't it funny? There was that wonderful first month when Trump got in and everything was being floated out, right? Elon Musk was like, hey, let's do it like a reality show. We'll film Fort Knox. And it was like, all of your conspiracy dreams will come true. And then suddenly they kept on with a lot of the other ones, but they dropped that one off. Did you notice that?
I noticed.
I want to point this out before I forget it, because it's not really a central part of this show, but I thought you would appreciate this, Miss Olivia, as well. And if I have the other piece of this, it would be better. So I'll find it before we're done. But anyway, on the National Institute of Health website, I found this. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no question about the website. COVID-19, an extraterrestrial disease? Question mark. That's
When is that from?
an NIH document. And it's dated from 2 years ago. COVID-19, an extraterrestrial disease. Very interesting to note that the whole piece about a space threat would include the potential of, just like they, delouse the astronauts when they get back from these missions and things, and they decontaminate everything. Part of this whole space threat could include that whole wonderful idea of an extraterrestrial virus. I thought it was interesting that they raised the question at all, because it's an absurd question in some ways, and yet it is the kind of things that they would want to trial balloon among their own group. And there it is sitting on the NIH website. And I'll be honest, when I was going through the different factors on that site, I came across it. And I was pretty shocked to see it, because I was not looking for it. And here it is. I found the other piece. Okay, I'm going to read it to you real quick, and then we'll get to your questions. Is that good? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 203. This is the space cage. We've been talking about it with Lockheed Martin and their takeover video that we put out on X earlier when I hosted the Alex Jones Show yesterday. Very interesting video there, but that space dominance is clear, and the UFO file. Now, main arguments. We now know that COVID-19 shares many features of common infectious respiratory diseases. We can now ascertain that SARS-CoV-2 has not suddenly presented new problems. Instead, it has exposed and exacerbated existing problems in health systems. And then they go on to say, conclusion, a complex disease cannot be solved through a simple magic bullet cure or vaccine. The heterogeneous nature of the population profile susceptible to developing a severe form of COVID, and they go on and go on. And, they talk about this thing, and the summation is, since the beginning of the pandemic, COVID was regarded as an exceptional disease. Control measures have exclusively focused on the virus for failing to account for other biological social factors that determine severe forms of the disease. Isn't it interesting that the title of this is COVID-19, an extraterrestrial disease? ? Just keep that in mind back there. And if I find more material on it, I'll share it, everyone. Yes.
Old as dirt. Has DJ any info on NASA putting a nuclear power plant on the moon? Bet nothing could go wrong with that.
Yes. And that whole idea, which was raised by Hegseth, they're very serious about. I actually have the original plan here for a nuclear response on the moon. And what they were going to do was set off a number of nuclear bombs on the moon. Yes, this is 1960 when it happened. The name of the program was that I have here. Let me see. The Study of Lunar Research Flights, Armor Research Foundation, Air Force Special Weapons Center. There's more to tell about this, and I mentioned it in a previous episode, but they had this thing about nukes on the moon previously, and they realized, oh, this is too dangerous, way too dangerous. Why it wouldn't be dangerous now, is unusual. But the idea of putting a nuclear reactor on the moon in the models, as I've shown in episode X200, just seems, you know, high risk. And if you get a meltdown like that in space, then what? You know, so that needs to be very, very carefully gone at and investigated hardcore in terms of the type of behavior that they're doing up there. We actually don't know what is going on the moon. Yes.
David Donaway, have extraterrestrial intelligences intervened in human evolution since the chipping of rocks to make fire, to evolve systems on systems towards a space cage of perfected civilization, top-down command?
See, this is very interesting because from the mystery school point of view, the Atlanteans already were advanced. They were the most advanced. So they could go anywhere in thought. They could go any part of the universe. Then, technologically, they advanced here through the Two-Eye Stone, which was originally a spiritual interface device, according to Casey. So just attributing all the progress to ancient aliens and all that doesn't make sense. Did we have off-world visitors during the Atlantean period who saw, boy, these guys are really getting advanced now. Maybe we should have some conversations with them. Yeah, I think that they did. There's a Casey reading that talks about a priestess who was being prepared to receive visitors from other planets. I always found that interesting because the Casey readings take place before the UFO craze of 1947, before we as a culture really discovered it. So therefore, you know, those questions wouldn't come up for Casey, but there he was volunteering one. So obviously there was something going on there. I found it very interesting that in an interview with Gordon Cooper from 1997, they asked him about if he felt there was life out there in the universe. And he said, you know, we still don't know that there isn't life on Mars. And then he started to make it sound like he felt there was some kind of human life on there at some point. And he said maybe some of it is still there deep in the caves and places that we can't penetrate. Now, this is extraordinary, but Cooper had a very deep, deep line because he was, you know, in some of the most secret projects for NASA. So what was he getting at there? That we still hadn't ruled out the idea of humans on Mars? Because the way that the cavern system worked meant we weren't able to penetrate through to really prove that one way or another, and that you couldn't do it with unmanned ships or probes. Very, very interesting. Where he was going with it, I don't know. But again, he was the person who was going to lead the Mars mission. He must have had a tremendous amount of information about Mars. So, yes, Miss Olivia.
Kelzilla says nukes on the moon is truly a modern Atlantean moment. And Nena says, saw side by side the Earth-facing side and dark side of the moon from LMH in 2015. If those craters are meteor damage, how come 90% of them are on the Earth-facing side? That is damn interesting.
Oh, it is interesting. Well, I always go back to Ingo Swann and his very unusual remote viewing sessions for God knows who they were, because they set him these blonde set of twins and he just thought it was his regular intel group that he did remote viewing for. But no, these people were different. And he was like, wait a minute, what did I get myself into? But they wanted to remote view the moon. And when they sent him there, he was aware of other telepaths who were present in that environment that made it hostile for him to be there. But what he did observe, according to his own testimony in those remote viewing sessions, were towers. And then he saw people walking all around. And the people that he saw walking were either in, like, you know, those jumpsuits that the aliens wear, or they were nude. It's also interesting. And he said they seemed to be involved in some kind of large scale construction project. That's what he was remote viewing in the 80s.
If you're all in touch with your intuition, you know
Ingo
just
Swann
go into your gut and you go, what's going on the moon? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on up there.
Unbelievable. Yeah, Swan gave us a very interesting picture on all this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X Series 203. We're going to take two more of your questions And I want to remind you, especially if you are new here, to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our free newsletter because it's going to keep you in touch with incredible, and I mean incredible things that we have coming up for you. Incredible X series episodes that'll blow your mind. The interview roster coming up for this fall is going to be off the charts. And the incredible miniseries documentaries that we have for you, Craze in the Hot Zone, Pyramid X, and JFK and the UFO File, all coming your way. Stand up and be counted and make sure you hear about it first, right in your inbox. So go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter. That'll keep us in touch around the massive censorship. Forget it. Miss Olivia, the last two
Well, I
questions.
don't know. You got a lot of books. You have.
Oh, I have some
lined up
quotes.
here.
Yeah, you're right. I have quotes too, but you'll start with your question.
Okay, so Beth Noyes, DJ, any chance the 3i Atlas could be our SSP tech coming back exactly when the Golden Dome is getting started, like a fake emergency? And Alan Jacobs, DJ, what is the deal with Avi Lobe and AI Atlas? Do you want to discuss his kind of Exodus Part 2?
Yeah, I have an
Substack?
episode coming up because we did a 3i Atlas overview episode, but now I've got some deeper info on it that might help us here in terms of how they're mutating their message too. But they're trying to use it as a threat. That's the first thing we need to be aware of. Two, what it actually is the next question. Three, you have guys out there who are very interesting scientists. One of them I met because he was at the Secret Space Program conference in Austin it's like 10 years ago now, but that's John Brandenburg, who has been a government scientist, and they allowed him to come out and talk about his theory that Mars was nuked way back when. And so he's been doing all of this kind of tracking of Mars and this thing and how this thing is going by Mars on October 1st. Linking 3i Atlas with Mars, I find interesting. And if you watch Gigi Young's work, you know how important Mars is for some of those elites. So that it becomes important for us to see what is going on here with that. And are they trying to link that whole thing in? But nonetheless, as a comet, there's a great significance scientifically, but also psycho-spiritually. There's a whole spiritual piece from Steiner about comets and their effect on the consciousness of the Earth and the forces that are battling over men's and women's souls. So I find that interesting as well whenever anything like this shows up. But we certainly have had our fair share in the last decade of things along this line. So also, I've been tracking that fireball piece with all these fireballs landing everywhere. And of course, it goes up and down throughout the year. But there have never been periods where these meteorites are just, everywhere you go, people are showing these videos of meteorites just crashing into their backyard and stuff. I mean, something is going on. Something is dragging into the system a lot of stuff behind it. And I think this is part of what has been tracked. So I think that maybe what I could say about 3i Atlas is I would expect, scientifically for this to be something else, and also for it to be dragging a lot of things in its wake. But I think the way that it's being used is false. And I don't think that it represents a threat to Earth or anything like that. I think that that is all UFO threat at its finest, as it were. And that's why you see the people out front on it. They had Lou, the bruiser, and the UFO threat. Ooh, there's a threat up there. I can't tell you more about it. You have to wait and all that stuff. And they ran that, they sucked that dry. And now they have Avi Lobe, who's been out there and saying, oh, it's an alien probe in the South Pacific. Give me another $5 million to check it out. So it was very interesting because Loeb and Lou asked for $1 billion, asked for $1 billion grant just to basically have a conversation about UFO, UAP over here at Harvard. And I guess Congress didn't give it to them, but this is where they're coming from. they want a lot of funding and they're willing to put out any message that their puppet masters tell them to. I feel very confident saying that about those two. And it was interesting to me because when they set up the Galileo project, I thought they were going to do something that had some aspirations toward being a great scientific endeavor. And the first thing that they did, and this was Avi Lobe, who as we said, is Talpiot, straight out of Talpiot Intelligence. Lobe put Lou and Mellon as the top people on the scientific chair. Last I checked, neither one of them were scientists. Okay. So surrounding yourself with CIA people when you are doing a science endeavor, highly questionable. So I think that from the beginning, the Galileo project had a lot of honest ethics issues, say a problem with being honest about what they actually were. And, it's weird the way that whole thing is, just like the Soul Foundation, which had Nolan and, Mellon's UAP Defense Fund and all that. What are those people really up to? They are agents of influence and, DOD billionaires, the wrong people at the wrong time for this. So that whole field needs an entire crew of leadership that's different, an entirely different ethics base, which favors research over headlines, control, billions of dollars, secret billionaire, all this stuff. Has nothing to do. The UFO file has nothing to do with the sick aspirations of a lot of these people you see around it. And you're seeing a lot of, even the people with credentials, who are supposed to be like, hey, they have this great credential. So this podcast is like, hey, you're a PhD or whatever. But the illness, there's been an illness that has invaded them. And I used to get that impression. I'll tell you, I've been around a lot of tech billionaires in life, and I've been around a lot of Wall Street people and stuff. There's a problem. There can be a problem there when you're in this environment and you don't actually get told the truth a lot, and people don't cut you down to size as sometimes we all need. And that's kind of the Bill Gates thing too. When you're in that bubble, people just praising Gates and all that, and then you come out and most of the world hates you because you're a lunatic trying to enforce your foundation on the world and block out the moon and the sun and all the rest. I mean, they go into a kind of psychosis, and because they're billionaires, you're not supposed to notice, right? So this is what you're dealing with. And I'll tell you, when I've been around that UFO field, the aspirations of people, when I talk to them about the nature of the topic and all the rest of it, people who should be leaders in that field, what they're aspiring to is almost like, I want to just put this like it is, like sort of a young woman going to Hollywood wanting to become an actress or something. It doesn't have any of the gravitas of a scientific endeavor for a lot of these people. And I remember when I was talking to Grush, I said, a lot of these people have said that you're holding all these things back, and the Defense Department has even allowed you to talk about it. And he said, why should I let my IP out like that? I'll eventually do a book and a movie or something. I mean, are those people serious? I mean, if you have the truth, share it. I mean, does everything have to be a Netflix movie? I think if these people were, if you're a real whistleblower and you really want the truth and you've seen something really dramatic, then you're not going to worry about all that, And I'm sure great success will come to you the more honest that you are anyway. So it's a kind of a sick thing that goes on in society in general right now. Yes.
It's like Sinatra and Suddenly, he was saying like, I'm not going to kill you. Nobody's paying me to do it. Right. It's like, you just don't do anything unless there's a profit motive. Unfortunately, that's how most people are wired. And when you're not wired that way, it's shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And great mention there. Suddenly is a fantastic movie about Sinatra about to assassinate the president, but it's from 1954. Put those two together. Everyone, what a fantastic show. I'm going to leave you with some quotes here, and then I'll do a few shout outs and we're done. All right. I just want to keep us in the realm when I talk about things like the deep state and continuity of government. I want to keep, going back to the sources on these things. And this is very important because I've cited the plagiarism in the field and this heavy plagiarism of my work at this point, but a number of my associates, and it's the podcast pop click stuff, doing it and not attributing it back and then being cocky about it, basically thinking, well, we don't have to because we're not going to get sued. I wouldn't be so sure about that. But check this out. This is very interesting. And I do think it's important that information has a kind of lineage. So, you really need to attribute things. And that's why, people like Farrell are the king of footnotes. He could do half his book about the work of Zecharia Sitchin, but he's talking about Sitchin. He's not pretending he developed the 12th planet and all that stuff, And when people hop onto the X series stuff and they extrapolate out of it, and you've got a Peter Thiel guy out there doing that right now. They're afraid. They're afraid if they mention dark journalists, because that whole system, we've been locked in a battle for the truth on this. And so that whole system of Mellon and all those influencers and all that, instantly, if you are going to acknowledge the deep work that we do, then, you're going to be on the outs with them. And it's fascinating. So what they'll do instead is they'll steal the work and they won't attribute it to the source. So this is what we've seen a lot of. But anyway, Professor Scott, if you're going to talk about continuity of government or the deep state, you're going to have to go to the source, and that is Scott. Make no mistake about it. The expansion of secret powers since 9/11. I'm going to read this little section here. With the implementation of COG, that's continuity of government, emergency responses to 9/11, we have indeed seen an exponential expansion of America as a dual state, or what Dana Priest called two governments. The one operated more or less in the open, and the other a parallel top secret government, visible to only a carefully vetted cadre. The second government, called by Priest and also William Arkin, who is a writer at Newsweek who talks about these things and got Newsweek to ban me because I was asking too many questions about the COG commanders. Second government, called by Priest and Arkin Top Secret America, should not be thought of as an identical thing to the deep state, but rather as the radically expanded institutional base for the deep state, ensuring an ever greater share of the national budget for top-down programs to constrain dissent both abroad and at home. The unchecked expansion of this base, much of it now outsourced, has continued under Obama, which is when this book was written. Even to budgetary cutbacks have expanded to weaken public government citizens. Continue to weaken the public government citizens are familiar with. All right. Then conclusion. Since the 1950s, American history has seen two competing narratives, one relatively stable and benign, and one posing as a lawless and dangerous threat to constitutional democracy. Protect people. On the other hand, a succession of power-hungry men have amassed excessive powers, and then the consequences have self-destructed or been ousted. Joe McCarthy in the 50s, Richard Nixon in 1974, destructed Oliver North in 1986, Donald Rumsfeld in 2006, key architect, COG. Their rise and fall might suggest that American politics essentially comprises a self-correcting homeostatic system, one in which excessive power generates counterforces to correct it. But this appearance of equilibrium is misleading. Each of these visible figures exercise powers because of their connection to a subterranean accumulation of illegal secret powers assembled originally and principally by J. Edgar. The departure of individuals did not establish effective legal checks and balances on the deep powers behind them. The one serious congressional effort to do this after Nixon's resignation in 1974 was successfully stymied, largely by Rumsfeld and Cheney, who went on to plan successfully for the expansion and implementation of these same powers, emergency powers. The second narrative illustrates the truth and principle well understood by America's founding fathers that power unchecked will continue to grow like a cancer. This unchecked growth of the security state has been reinforced by a parallel and related development, the unchecked accumulation of gross wealth by the top 1% of the top 1%, and so on. But I think there, Professor Scott grabs it right at the heart of it, which is what's actually going on. And he's saying, you know, it would seem because of the fall of some of these characters that the nature of the system is self-correcting. But what he's saying is that system goes on and it has occasionally some disposable front people, but the actual system continues with those secret powers and it elects new outlets and new points for this. We need to keep that in mind as we go along here. And my final quote is going to come out of Firestorm, which is the book all about James McDonald, the incredible and really remarkable ufologist who was done in by the Ex-Protect group, but not before revealing a great deal. And this I found very interesting. It actually is Heinik, J. Allen Heinik, and McDonald going back and forth. Quote, one statement by Heinik at the public part of the hearing was especially evasive, and this irritated McDonald. He later expressed his displeasure to Heinik in no uncertain terms. Heinik had testified, during the International Geophysical Year, I was in charge of the optical satellite tracking program. And you would think that the surveillance the astronomers placed on the sky, that if these objects existed as tangible objects, surely astronomers would have seen them. And they would have seen more than they did. It is a dilemma. So this is very interesting that Heinik was a disinformation agent at that point and then changed, got out of this role. And it's possible even that seeing McDonald being done in by Ex-Protect made him do that. But again, the mention in the heart of it of the International Geophysical Year is the crucial observation. We're doing an episode on IGY coming up here in the fall that's going to open up a lot. And of course, Lloyd Berkner and McDonald and Heinik are all involved. And with that, Miss Olivia, either your final question or whatever you got.
Throw something out there that's philosophical.
Yes.
And Jessica Rodriguez said earlier, why are we so hell-bent on destroying ourselves? And I'm thinking about Joseph Campbell and archetypes. And for some reason, I keep going back to Little Red Riding Hood. And
yeah.
The thing is, we are a species that works with archetypes and with narratives and the hero's journey. And if you think about Red Riding Hood or Dorothy, or it's the youth that needs to shift the dynamic, the power dynamic. The wolf isn't going to change.
Yeah.
The threat isn't going to change.
Right.
It is the threat is there to help Red Riding Hood to mature, to self-actualize. And so we actually, it's hard to see things that way, but we really have to, is that our problem is that we're children and that we need to grow the F up. And that's really it. We need to mature. We need to get wiser. We need to get smarter, and we need to get independent, self-sufficient, all of these things. And that is on an individual as well as a collective basis, knowing where we're weak and indulgent, and deciding instead to become strong and have real pride and dignity.
I always loved the Little Red Riding Hood story. I think it's fascinating, and it's great that you brought it up there, because I think it opens up a great deal. I would agree with that 100%. And it is about taking ownership of, being responsible in your own life. There's no disclosure that's going to change any of that, right? Everyone, I'm going to do a few shout outs here and then we'll leave you. It's been great to have so many of you here in the ideas room with me. And it was wonderful, of course, to do the Alex Jones show. So thank you all for your feedback on that. And I'm doing more with Alex coming up. So just stay tuned on that. We're going to have some fun. Okay. Nina says, Elsid Barrett. Everyone's out there. Fulcanelli. Scarlet Fire. Make decisions with your heart. You'll never regret it. Well, it's really true. Fantastic advice. Tim Houston. I prefer the exploded planet to the Oort cloud origin of comets. Interesting. Well, something very interesting I could put on the record about that. Remind me next time, because we have something really interesting about that and the debris in space, shall we say. And Elizabeth, you're right on, Olivia. We must learn to discern mental problems and learn how to work with people who are mentally problematic. Indeed. Totally agree. W. Ross, thank you. Appreciate your support, sir, very much. Thank you for viewing it. I'm just assuming it's a sir. If it's a miss, I apologize. Let's see. Who else have we got here? Matthew Stewart, Happy Hermit. Surface Planet Radio. That's a great name. I think I've mentioned that's a great name before. What else have you got here? Philip Blair. It's good to see you out there, sir. Lisa Davis. We're the ones we've been waiting for. Isn't that true? Robert Kennedy's famous quote to John, if not us, who? If not now, when? With the right amount of effort, they would say. Who else have we got? Moondog Davis. Great show. Thanks. Thank you, Moondog. Thank you for being out there. Great to have so many of you out there tonight with us. And Mike Branahan. Nanette Crest. Wow. Nanette, amazing artwork. I am going to email you about that. Just extraordinary.
The Buddhist of Boston Sports says DJ has the worst Boston accent, LOL. And yet you are from Boston.
I resent that. And simultaneously, I will put a man on the moon. Susu Pake, super sticker. Thank you so much, Susu. You really made our night with that. And let's see. Who else have we got here? Chrissy, I'll be over here walking through flowers and flirting with bees. Well, it's definitely a gardener type. We can tell it. I like it. There's more about the accent in there. Let's see. We choose to go to the moon. That's it. Love always. Pixie Pixel. Wow, great. 7 years listening. Tim DaCosta. Wow. Thank you,
right
Tim.
On.
Really appreciate it. And we're going to try to deliver even more potent journalism for you going forward. And I want to say to all our subscribers, thank you.
Want to show anybody this book?
Oh, did you do your super chat?
No, I haven't yet.
Yeah, I already did. I already did.
Thank
you.
Okay. Let me line this up. Okay. So, Sick of the BS? Pop Culture Avenger, James Pesta, Pete DeSalvo, Eurythmia's Fun, Steven, Amarillo Gunrunners, Channeling the Heart, Barbara Joyce, The Bikini Truther, Natalia Christine Escudero, Terry Doherty, Fulganelli, Erica Swenson Elliott, David Lowry, Doyle Wayne, Mike Brosnahan, Jonathan McIntosh, B. Brax, Conrad, Pete DeSalvo, Brian Whitaker, W. Ross, and Susu Pake. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow, fantastic. And to all our supporters, thank you. Somebody mentioned something about LBJ's Gold there. Without our subscribers, we couldn't do what we do. So we're going to keep putting that forward with your support. So thank you for backing us up. And so many great people out there tonight. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. And Heather Sansone. fantastic. Lisa Doyle, amazing show. She gets the word of the night there.
Mhm.
And we will see you all next week. Fantastic Labor Day is coming up for you, and we have some incredible shows lined up for you in September. Please join us, and we will see you all next week. Until then, it says end broadcast, but after all,
Never really ends.
never really ends. Have a great night, everyone, and remember, never let it be forgot that once there was a Camelot and there can be again. Thank you, everyone.
God bless everybody.
Have a great night.